The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Saturdays or Sundays, SOR Media, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this broadcast or podcast without the expressed written consent of SOR Media is strictly prohibited. Listener discretion is advised. Are you experienced? Then come own the night with us.
Little brother has taken control, shoveling dirt in every hole. Predators to condemn your soul, watching you and watching me. We're all
stationed atop the mountains of British Columbia, live from SOR headquarters. This is Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
We live behind glass curtains and act like nothing's wrong. Soon you will belong.
You can follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, and on Spaced Out Radio on iTunes. You can follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio, and on Instagram at Dave Scott SOR, on Facebook at Spaced Out Radio Show, and on our YouTube channel, Spaced Out Radio.
Brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized. Everyone's got an electric eye with the digital spies. They've watched you for so long. I know you're out there somewhere watching me.
Buckle up, space travelers. It's time to go for a ride on Spaced Out Radio with host Dave Scott.
I know you're out there somewhere. We've watched you for so long. Wait for you to fall. We'll expose you all. I know you're out there somewhere watching me. Little brother wants to make headlines, be immortalized.
It's Tuesday, May 22nd, Wednesday, May 23rd, if you're on the East Coast or across the pond. And this, my friends, is Spaced Out Radio. Hope you had a great day and night. I am your host, Dave Scott, live in the Great White North in the Caribou region, on top of the mountains of central British Columbia, right here at SOR headquarters. We're 150,000 strong nightly on the SOR radio network, including the Fringe.fm. You can also watch us live every Monday through Friday night on Periscope TV. Hi, everyone at Periscope. Thank you for tuning us on in. And if you are a first-time viewer on Periscope, make sure you hit that follow button. Our YouTube channel, youtube.com/spacedoutradio. That's where we hide our archives. You can listen to them for free. Do me a favor, subscribe to that as well. Our website, spacedoutradio.com, where we got a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to some Bumblefoot, shop at our Spaced Out Radio store, read up on the encounter online, or watch great videos from UFO Seekers, Contact TV, and so much more. A big shout out to my dad, Dave Sr., tonight. It's his 69th birthday. My dad is my hero, my idol. Just spent the weekend with him and the family and my mom, hanging out, celebrating all the birthdays. I know he's having a good day today. Talked to him earlier. So happy birthday, Dad. Love you so much. Thank you for being the best dad in the world. Tonight, I want you to all look up at the moon and think for a moment. Did we make it there, or was it the all-time elaborate hoax? For almost 50 years now, we've been debating whether or not we've actually made it and walked on the lunar surface, or whether all of the videos that we've seen are just filmed in some Hollywood-like studio. Lighting, wind, camera angles that don't make sense. Sure, there may be a lot of question marks that we just don't understand. Tonight, to shed some light on this, is Glenn Steckling from the Adamski Foundation. George Adamski was a lifelong ET contactee who went publicly with his experiences with humanoid aliens and UFOs. And we're going to got a lot to get into tonight. Glenn Steckling, thank you so much for coming on Spaced Out Radio, my friend. How are you?
Very good. It's a pleasure to be with you, Dave, and also regards to your father on his birthday. That's always a wonderful time.
It is. It totally is. And, you know, my mom just turned 75 on May 5th, and my dad is 6 years younger. He's 69, and I'll be 45 in 2 days. And, you know, I started talking to my sister the other night about it because I was away at her place for the weekend because we did a big family party for all the birthdays, about how blessed we are as a family to still have both our parents. Hell, we still have one grandparent alive, so I'm pretty cool with that, you know?
Absolutely. Fantastic. It's something you can be thankful for every day.
You know I have a lot of people in my life who've lost a parent, and maybe even both parents at this time. And, yeah, it's something that I definitely do not take for granted, that's for sure. You know, I mean, I don't live near my parents. They're a few hours' drive away, but we talk every day. And I think that's important.
Absolutely. I had a very close relationship with my parents. Obviously, since being involved in this field for over half a century with them. My father passed away in 91, very young, from some heart conditions that was accrued during his youth, during the war, rheumatic fever. And then my mother passed away about 4 months ago. So I'm well aware of the joy of having them and also the sorrow of not. But we live on and we do the best we can, and we need to live every moment for the precious commodity that it is, and that way we never have any regrets.
You got that right. My friend. Let's learn a little bit about you, Glenn, because you are part of the Adamski Foundation, so you have been highly immersed in UFOs, extraterrestrial talk, whether or not we went to the moon. There's so much that we're going to get into the next 3 hours with you. I really don't even know where to start. I mean, I want to talk about the moon, but the Adamski Foundation and George Adamski, I mean, there's so many different ways that we could go with this. Do you ever get wrapped up in the whole scenario that you're involved in and just say, wow, I can't believe my life turned this way?
Well, yeah, you could look back at it this way, or you're just a part of it as the years and the decades pass, and so much accomplishments and exposure. For me, I've been very fortunate. My parents were already interested in this subject during the war when they grew up in Europe. There were a number of sightings then, even all the way back to 1918. There's still picture archives of UFOs over Europe. And so we can look at this historically, not only from that time period, but all the way back to the Middle Ages with paintings and biblical reports. So the fact that we have been visited and continue to be visited as really part of our own civilization's history going back thousands, if not tens of thousands of years. But for us, as my parents watched these craft and plotted their courses, my father had a giant map on which he put colored pins in there of reports all around the world of these UFOs. And then when they came to this country, we had a number of sightings in New Orleans, also in Colorado Springs, and then over Washington, D.C., downtown during broad daylight over the nation's capital. One of these saucers hovered above the city. There were about 30 or 40 witnesses on the street, including a reporter for the Washington Daily News, and which that was all reported in the paper several days later, and that's part of our archives as well. And so my father, at that point, went to the Library of Congress in the factual section and started alphabetically. And A for Adamski, he picked up the book, Flying Saucers Have Landed, and Inside the Spaceships, and then there were telegraphic and telephotic photos of these type of crafts that were taken by George Adamski, also motion picture films that we later saw. And so my father wrote to him in the spring of '63, and Mr. Adamski was coming out to Washington, which he did on a regular basis, and was lecturing to the Air Force Reserves. And so we met him, became very close friends. Eventually, his personalized co-workers along with other people on the East Coast. And then when he passed away in 65, a lot of the work passed on to us as well as the foundation. And we've been maintaining this in continuum ever since 1965. But we can say that our research has gone back already to the turn of the century. So this exposure to these crafts, to the government contacts, after Adamski passed away, my parents were invited to NASA in 1966 before a panel of 22 scientists, Dr. Lohman, to review the Adamski photos and films and to talk about this entire subject. And you will find that, and I've been exposed to this my whole life, when you're talking to the people who are serious about this subject, and I'm not talking about the peripheral fringe that throws out a lot of theory and hypothesis and innuendo without any fact behind it. But when you talk to the people who are actually involved, they have a great deal of information. They knew all about these crafts, where they came from in our solar system, the type of human people who pilot them, and there was a great deal of information translated back and forth, including the use of telepathy, which they were using and experimenting with in order to have a backup communication systems for the space program. We were going into Mercury and Gemini, and soon thereafter Apollo. And shortly thereafter, Colonel Freeman from the Pentagon invited my parents in and did the same thing. And Colonel Freeman and his staff said these were some of the best films he had ever seen in civilian hands. So from there, the contacts with the scientists and these official versions, we were able to get access in the 70s to the ordering facility for the microfilms and photographs from the Apollo missions. And I can tell you with absolutely 100% certainty that we did go to the moon. And, of course, what most people forget, who didn't grow up in that era or have conveniently used the Internet as 100% source of their information versus the reality of what actually happened, hundreds of ground-based telescopes from all over the world tracked Apollo to the moon. And you can still, if you use the 200-inch observatory up in Mount Palomar, if you focus onto the landing sites, you can still see the equipment sitting there. So there's a huge discrepancy in this particular field between what people say and what they can prove and what they can back up. And we have come to an era of, shall we say, misinformation that is propagated in order to bend thinking a certain direction towards a particular agenda. And so I work very diligently to remind the people of the facts. And in fact, one of the greatest proponents for this faking the moon thing, I pulled out of archives the 15 by 11 Hasselblad pictures that we got from NASA in the 70s, from which we did the research on the book Alien Bases on the Moon, which is now in the second edition. And when you look at these high-quality, high-definition photos, you can not only see the lunar surface, you can see the LEM, you can see the lunar orbiter in orbit, you see Earth rise. These are all things that you cannot fake from a laboratory or from a studio in the 1960s. Not only that, you have the downlink telemetry of all the scientific equipment that has been left on the moon. It has reported spraying water geysers, lunar atmosphere, clouds, mists, so on and so forth. And so this is the environment that I have grown up in, and these are the type of circles we have had the fortune to talk and speak with. I've had the opportunity to go up to the U.S. Air Force telescope in Maui and Haleakala by invitation with DOD clearance and look at some of their pictures and facilities they had up there, as well as a scientific symposium out in the southwest of the U.S. with some of the greatest minds that are involved with the thinking of this subject. And I can tell you that from that standpoint, this whole subject takes a much more realistic and rational light than it does in most circumstances, what has transpired over the many years of the mixing, what I call the witch's brew, of what is thrown out there, innuendo.
I'm a firm believer that we went to the moon too, and we're going to get into that a lot more later on in the show. With yourself, Glenn, when it comes to UFOs, when it comes to aliens, ET contact, whatever it may be, were you always a believer in this type of supernatural phenomena, or did it have to grow on you because skeptically you maybe just weren't sure whether or not it existed?
Well, rather than supernatural, we were always considered it to be very natural. The fact that life exists beyond this planet is nothing more than the extension of natural biologics, because the organic materials, all the elements that compose life, come from space, and we're surrounded in that womb of creation, just like the rest of the planets are and the rest of the cosmos is. So it was never considered to be an unnatural, or shall we say, a fringe thought or concept. In fact, the principles of nature and creation and chemistry support it 100%. So I would say no to that question. The other side of the question is, since I've been exposed to this from a very early age, I mean, I've been seeing these crafts already at the age of 5 and 6 up close. I have been present with both my parents and Mr. Adamski during some of his extraterrestrial contacts, and we knew some of these people thereafter. And the fact that they came and visited us, one of the greatest conversations we had with a group of scientists was how many extraterrestrials that look like human beings are visiting us and walking amongst us at any given time. And so my father wrote down a number on a piece of paper, the scientist wrote down his number, they traded papers, and they're pretty much the same number. So they were well aware that we have visitors who come here on a short-term basis, intermingle, learn from us, pass information to us. They're not here to fix our problems. What we create, we must learn how to fix ourselves. But they are of assistance and toward giving us a little bit of a guiding push or a little bit of refocus. And so I've had the opportunity with these kind of backgrounds, and then having large telescopic pieces and looking at the moon independently, and looking at all the microfiche in the films and ordering the pictures and traveling around the world. My father was on Art Linkletter, Japanese national television, European lectures, and on which I accompanied him on many of these trips. And we had instances and circumstances there. Going across in 1966 to Europe to lecture, my father took a film out of the porthole of the 707 going across the North Atlantic, and down below us was a large cigar-shaped ship about 6,000 feet in length. And we have taken those photos, and we have given to a friend of mine who is in Denmark. His name is Rene Olsen, and he has used a very sophisticated new technology in order to clear up the pictures and take a look at them, and he just is in the process of publishing them this week and releasing them, in which a lot of these photographs are very clear and sharp. And so that film was taken in 66, and then we were in Germany on the lecture tour during that same time. There was a fleet of UFOs traveling alongside of the train. And so in those days, you hold the train's window down, it's spring-loaded down. So I'm holding the window down, my father's standing there with his camera, all the people are lined up next to us along the side of the train, and he's filming these fleet of cigar-shaped crafts behind the trees and up in the atmosphere. And so that was shown on European television. And so, as I say, I've been extremely fortunate to be very well-grounded and exposed in this field. And I say that with all humility, because this subject is one that does require humility and cooperation and hope in order to bring about a better understanding in life on this planet.
And hopefully one day we can see more people waking up. Do you see that happening as the younger generation seem more accepting into the fact that there could be life outside of Earth?
Oh, yes. I mean, to some degree, science fiction has been a very negative influence, and I'll explain why. But in the same token, it's been a positive influence because it's opened people's thoughts to the not only the possibility, but the mathematical probability and all likelihood that life exists throughout the cosmos. And so while at one particular point we have worked very destructively to poison the minds of people with movies like, Alien and Abduction, and And God knows the list is endless of all the horror films that have to do with extraterrestrial life that comes here to either feed on us or terrorize us or so on and so forth. We have created an immense stigma of fear and apprehension, which didn't exist in the early period of this particular subject. During the 40s and 50s, we were doing a term like with the movie The Day the Earth Stood Still, where people were openly curious, and the number of landings were reported worldwide, the number of ships. I've got archives of all these newspaper accounts all over the capitals, all over the world, of these flying saucers and cigar-shaped ships being seen and witnessed, photographed and filmed. So we were highly exposed to a time where we could have changed progressively. But we changed the whole emphasis of this in the early 1960s and pushed the opposite direction to turn this into a fear factor. And that is so that we are discouraging our population from interacting with anybody who lands and comes from another world and visits us. Because we are, shall we say, very afraid. The powers that be have a very precise and managed progression of how things are conducted on this planet. Many people fear a one-world government. Well, I got news for you. You've had it for a long time, because when it comes to economics and it comes to protocols, these policies and procedures are all decided in much deeper levels. And this form of government that you're familiar with is nothing more than a facade to pacify the masses, to create nationalism and to create differences and tensions so that we can continue to run high-engine industries and economies that depend upon these particular manufacturing of military weapons and so on and so forth. And so in one way we have gotten a good thing, and another way a bad thing. The trouble is, in the bad part, we've run away from our imaginations. We have anything that comes to mind has become embraced because people don't really know. In other words, we've had this discussion about time travel and the inability, if we're to exist, simply because the principles of nature do not allow you to deconstruct the present in order to reconstruct the past, or the future for that matter. So while we have some good ideas, we also have some entrenched bad ideas, because there is such a high level of ignorance as to what is possible and what is not, and why things are a certain way and why they're not. It's like deciding to go in for heart surgery, but instead you're going to take a taxi driver to do it, and he's just going to guess. And that's what's going on in this field so much today. People are throwing out their guesses, and they don't know really what they're talking about. And that is the sad part, because we are doing such an immense disservice to not only ourselves, but also to the people who come in to visit us to bring us some help and some intelligence and some cooperation. And so we are moving away from those type of contacts because we don't want to change the circumstances of how this world is governed. And that is one of the major emphases, is why there will never be true disclosure. That's a fallacy.
Well, then I'm going to ask you about this then. What do you think about this entire To the Stars campaign regarding Tom DeLonge's team with a lot of ex-spooks that are involved trying to pursue the UFO phenomena? Are you buying it, or do you think it's just another shell group with a bunch of shills in there who are wanting to take over an industry?
Well, once again, this is a multifaceted stone, and there are many different organizations and many different groups are in things for their own particular means, thoughts, and concepts, or it can be we don't even know what they're after at the far end of this, because that type of information is not privy to us. I believe that the exploration of space needs to come out of the military control, and basically that's what NASA is. It's a military organization. And it needs to go into the public forum. And the more countries that have gone into the space exploration, the Japanese, the Chinese, the Indian, and what have you, the information has come out a little bit more or less grudgingly. I give you an example. In 1989, we were in a conference in Europe, and the wall had just come down. Eastern Europe had just opened up, and there were 3 former Soviet scientists that came and asked for a private discussion in which we had many different things that were talked about. But one of them we talked about was the fact that just a couple weeks before, TASS, which was still the Russian official news agency, had released a report of these craft landing near a village out in the steppes of Russia. And the fact is, as we know now, is that the Russians have decommissioned old military bases and have set up landing areas already for many, many decades. And there was a standing order to the military never to shoot at any of these crafts. And the one general that disobeyed that order was retired within days of having commanded a shooting at one of these craft. So the craft land, the people get out, they walk into town. The people in the village were familiar with them because they had seen them before, where these craft land there. And so they reported the event. When that report got into the Western European press, now they were no longer people. They were 8 feet tall, and they had multiple arms. By the time it got into the Western United States press, which you think you have a free press and you have anything but, then you have individuals that were multiple arms and multiple eyes and so on and so forth. And so the scientists said, this is how this subject is predetermined to be twisted by the time it gets into the public arena, so people can't make up heads or tails of anything, and that way they dismiss it as it being too ridiculous or too incredible and what have you. I'll give you another example. When I was in Israel, who knows how, about a decade ago, maybe less than that, there was a report of one of these crafts coming down over Jerusalem. And while I cautioned many in this field not to jump to conclusions too quickly, boy, they picked up that football and ran like crazy, drawing all kinds of ridiculous conclusions of why a ship would come over Jerusalem or Israel or any place else. And but anyway, that report was on the 5th or 6th page of the newspaper at the very bottom, with a report of a sighting of a mermaid right on top of it. So the psychological manipulation of how this information is dealt with has become more and more poisoned as time goes on. So while we would think that things are getting better, in a way, they aren't really. You have to dig deep and you have to look behind things, and that's why we put out some of the books and materials we have, and to show people the commonality. You have life on Earth in every extreme environment. You go to the moon, and although it's not Tahiti or West Palm Beach, you have atmosphere, you have atmospheric pressure, you have clouds, you have mists. All these things have been reported. You have water geysers. Now, every biologist will tell you, in order to have life, you have oxygen, you have water, and you have energy. And we find that those 3 basics, along with the organics of life, the biochemistry, which is common throughout the cosmos, exists on the moon, on Mars, and so on and so forth.
In all of your research that you have done regarding this, how big is this cover-up with the governments? And I'm not just saying the U.S., but every government in the world has to be involved in this one way or another. Do we have a bunch of governments out there and countries out there that are being told by, say, the Big Five to shut their mouths on this? Or do we have a bunch of governments that are too afraid to say anything because they're not sure how their citizens will react? Is it an individual thought process here?
It's a combination. Yes, we exert a great deal of influence, and we, as much as we pride ourselves on the concept of so-called freedom and individuality, we are deathly afraid of these particular concepts, and we try to keep people in the masses of thought and action, and how they will react, and so on and so forth. So, as you recall, I would say about a little over 10 years ago, the French released some of their information. Then the Brits came out with some of their information. And then there was a talk about a certain amount of information that may be coming out of here with the Freedom of Information Act. But remember, people, be logical. They're not going to sit on decades of information and data that they have hidden away only to open it up to you and say, boy, we pulled a fast one on you, and, we don't want to think of you as all stupid, but that's how we treat you. All the information that comes out is very carefully reviewed, very carefully censored. And as you're well aware, when you get something out of the Freedom of Information Act, you get a page that's 95% blacked out and just a few sentences here and there. Why is that if the information is supposed to be free? And so, yes, the information is highly managed, and very little of true value escapes. Now, it doesn't say that it doesn't sometimes, because we've had security and information breaches and data breaches and hacking and things like that, where bits and pieces have come out. And there is also a contingent that wishes the information to come out and puts it out in small piecemeal pieces. Unfortunately, for those who aren't highly interested in the field or aren't vigilant, oftentimes that slides by the wayside. Or we have become so saturated with our own particular thoughts and actions and lives and what have you that we don't give consideration beyond anything else. And in many places in the world, life is so arduous and so subsistent that most of the people are working 90% of their time just to put food in their mouths. And so, once again, we have a managed global situation. And so, yes, there has been some good information, and yes, there has been information that has been twisted, and then there's other information that's injected in there. We take Roswell, for instance. Yes, the incident happened. By far, it's not the only one that's happened. There have been instances in England and other countries of the same thing, of crashed recovery. All the bodies in Roswell were dead. I have found that people tried to inject false information thereafter, saying, oh, well, one was alive, and we took it to Area 51, and we kept it in the jail. I got news for you people. There is no containment on this planet capable of containing these extraterrestrials. They'll walk right through the wall, open the door and walk right through. There's nothing we could do to contain them. So to keep them prisoner right there tells you the story is BS. And secondly, none of them would be left behind. Their compatriots would never leave them behind in this hostile environment. So once again, a true story injected with tangent falsehoods in order to twist towards a particular direction. And that's what I find very destructive in this field.
When you say they being the aliens, who are they? We all think of the Greys. We all think of other species, humanoids. What are you talking about when you say they? Well,
the research that has been done not only by ourselves but by biochemists, there are other people in this field as well. They have come to the same conclusions that we were exposed to information-wise, that there are four groups: human, humanoids, robotics, and androids. And so oftentimes there's a confusion factor. Many people may be viewing the robotics and confusing that for a sentient being, or an android for a sentient being. But this is another science fiction fallacy. The universe is not the bar scene in Star Wars. That is pure science fiction imagination. That is us unwilling or unable to do some basic looking at how the molecules and the elements come together. If you look at the Dr. Panampura, who was the chief chemical biologist of the Maryland Physics Laboratory, he wrote a book called The Principles of Life. But he by far is not the only major scientist who is on this concept. He says the combination of the organics, the RNA and DNA, comes together in the same uniform way. People, in their minds, may be fragmented in their thinking, but nature is never fragmented. It goes about very precise rules of how the atoms combine, the molecules combine, how RNA and DNA come together, how life is formed. Those are standard biological biochemistry principles. And so, for instance, he says, you will not find silicone-based life because the silicone molecules are water-soluble. They will not combine and they will not hold together. So what happens is, once again, we have a huge discrepancy between our imaginations and what is actual fact behind it. Few people want to do the work that's involved in anything, let alone this field, to actually put in the time to understand what is, how things work, and why they don't work a particular way otherwise. And so we, once again, work ourselves further and further away from the truth. Truth becomes an elusive fish swimming in front of us, darting back and forth, that we can never grab our hands around, because we don't want to do and to learn and to teach ourselves and our children how things truly are in creation. That's where we go wrong. The very foundation is where we already go wrong.
Let's start to focus on the moon landings here, because there is a lot of people out there, whether they're newer generation, older generation, who do not believe that we stepped on the moon, that the Apollo missions were just a hoax. I mean, it's gone so far where we've seen actually Buzz Aldrin punch somebody out over a stupid comment, saying that he wasn't on the moon.
Well, can you blame him? I mean, really, people. Let's get a grip here. Anybody who lived through that era and watched the Mercury launches and watched Gemini and watched the docking procedures and watched Apollo, once again, viewable by ground-based telescopes by hundreds of thousands of people all over this planet, none of them will tell you that the space program or the moon program was a hoax. Only the people who didn't live through that era or have not gotten any background information. I mean, when you look at the films of orbit, Ed White during Spacewalk, and we're not even talking about the Russians who were far in front of us in this particular field. Skylab, Space Lab, Shuttle system. I mean, even after all of this, we still got people who think that the Earth is flat. I mean, truly. When are we going to grasp what is in front of us and see it for what it is? I mean, I can believe the moon is made out of cheese, but it isn't going to make it so. So we're doing, once again, we're throwing out innuendo. Where's the proof? These astronauts had to strap themselves on top of a controlled bomb. If you've ever watched some of the early Mercury shots before we end up putting up Monkey, Ham, and Shaman on there, and then we put on the Mercury 7, did you see how many of these craft blew up on the pad or did a U and exploded into the ground? I mean, it took a large set of cojones to strap yourself on this thing and get willing to shoot yourself in your space. And we do an unbelievable dishonor to these people who worked in order to get this program going. And I don't blame Aldrin at all. I'd have punched the guy in the kisser too, because it is ridiculous. Where is their proof? We have films, we have videos, we have photographs, we have lunar material, we have scientific data, we have telescopic shots of it. I mean, come on. What more do you need?
Well, it's more than just the flat earthers who are saying this. I mean, that's just a ridiculous argument as it is, in my opinion. But the whole point is there's a lot of people who believe Stanley Kubrick made these videos. They're a little bit too clear. They're a little hazy. Why is there a shadow, or no blast-off markings from the lunar module when it leaves the planet? Why is the flag waving when there's no oxygen or wind up on the moon?
Well, there you go. But there you go. We have proven that the moon has a lunar atmosphere. We have proven that there's atmospheric pressure differential. We have proven that there's clouds and mists and moving lights. This is all part of the entire program that has been not only telescopic-based, but also space-based. In order to, the moon's environment is much different. So once again, these people are starting off from a premise of what isn't, but they don't know what is or what isn't. Absolutely. And so when you look at the lunar rover driving around the surface, you can see the plume of dirt coming off the back of the tires and gently falling back to the lunar surface. You have to have a gravity and atmospheric pressure to do that. In order to get the lunar a spacecraft to the moon in successful orbit, you have to understand the L1, which is 45,000 miles from the lunar surface, is more than 1/6 gravity. So the reality of what the actual conditions is quite different from what we have been taught. We have been taught a dead moon theory. We have been taught the 1/6 gravity Newtonian law, which has been proven also to be 15% inaccurate as far as Newton is concerned. And so when we look at this information, then we can clearly see that it's not made in a studio. Sure, whatever Kubrick said, that's one movie producer. Big deal. I mean, 2001 was a great shot, and when you sat in the theater and you looked at the spinning space station in space, you thought, well, boy, that's a wonderful thing that it was brand new for us to see at those times. But that doesn't mean that you've sort of faked the entire space mission. Where this faking concept comes from is from the movie Capricorn 1, which was much later, with Broden and O.J. Simpson, in which the astronauts were supposedly supposed to be shot up there, but the craft exploded and so on and so forth. And so you have, once again, a movie theme that people pick up and go. But they're doing that everywhere. They pick up and run with Stargate. They pick up and run with Alien. They pick up and run with Armageddon. It never ends. But that doesn't mean that all the tangible scientific fact and evidence, I mean warehouses full of pictures and photos. We've got so much data that we don't even have the equipment anymore to go backwards and look at it, let alone the personnel and the budgets, because we don't support the space program. Heck, we have to borrow a ride on the Russians to get into space now. That's at least from the official standpoint. Underlying, there are other issues involved there, too. So
absolutely.
I defy anyone to prove their innuendo. Yeah, you can see hazy moonshot pictures. I've got them in the book, because you have atmospheric haze over the moon that you can see as the Earthrise comes up. That's not unusual. God knows there's enough pictures you can do it with your own telescope. So this, a little basic science would go a long way. A little bit rational thinking would go a long way in this field.
And I understand that, and I can appreciate that. But, I mean, with everything that happens, there's always a conspiracy theorist out there. Now, I believe that we did go to the moon. I'm still trying to figure out why we haven't gone back. But one of the big questions that a lot of people have is NASA has allegedly destroyed all their plans, their projects on how to get to the moon, and they don't have it anymore. So they're starting from scratch. That really doesn't make sense when you have such a momentous occasion as the Apollo missions.
Well, actually, I haven't heard that at all. In fact, by paying a little attention to the news, I've heard that we're working on a new stage of booster rocket that's supposed to be much more powerful than the Saturn V. We're working, of course, to go to Mars. I think that if we worked collaboratively with other nations into a combined space program, it wouldn't be such a financial burden on one particular nation, and we would get there a lot quicker and go much faster in our progress. But who's to say that even though from the public standpoint we stopped going to the moon with Apollo 17, that we didn't continue to go otherwise from the military standpoint? And there are many who believe that we continued to do that, and I believe as well that we have continued on to moon exploration. When you look at Clementine and the highly classified program of mapping the moon and radio photography and infrared and all the specialized scientific equipment to do a very precise, detailed lunar composition, and other countries talk about lunar base construction and what have you, I don't think that's very far-fetched at all. In fact, if you look at the book or the documentary that was first came out called Alternative 3, it was released in the UK, caused such a panic, very much like World of the Worlds did with Orson Welles, that they pulled it off the air and then prescribed it to being science fiction. But it stated that we already had gone in the 70s to the moon and established moon colonies, and we are the only ones who did it. So, I mean, when you look at the moon and you do some telescopic observations, you can look at straight wall areas that look like construction. You can look at the Archimedes and Aristarchus plateau, especially Gassendi Crater. A lot of these pictures I sent you uploaded as photographs, high-quality scans for you to show to the public. Hopefully one of these days when you get everything up with your website, you can still put them up for them to see. You will see in Gassendi Crater, already from the 1930s, Mount Wilson Observatory, huge, long, straight, 90-degree constructions of piping going through not only the bottom of the crater, through the crater wall, out the other side of the plateau. And the astronomers who talked that said they watched the construction of these things increase over time, and over time slowly decrease as well. And so I think the moon has a plethora of activity, not only our own, but also, as Dr. Sagan said, it is the prime location for Earth observation. So I'm sure that we have it as a waypoint for our extraterrestrial visitors as well.
I agree with you on that. I believe that, for us as Earthlings to keep this secret that it was a hoax, you're literally talking about tens of thousands of people who worked on the most minute projects of this Apollo mission in order for all of them to keep it silent. And then on the inner core, maybe 1,000, 2,000 people on the inner core. That's a lot of people to keep a secret like this. You know what I'm saying?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And not only that, I mean, when you think about it, once again, when you have ground-based tracking systems that show the craft coming back from the moon, coming into trajectory with the Earth re-entry, the literally filming of it coming through the upper atmosphere before the parachutes open up, and of the command module, a capsule, and so on and so. I mean, really, it really is. It is really mind-boggling to think that that all of these things and all of these people and all of these technicians and all of these telescope people. Remember, not only professionals but amateurs too. I mean, you had hundreds of them all over the world tracking during their particular phase of alignment. That is just. So I pointed this out at one lecture to one fellow who was so adamant about the faking thing. I said, well, what about the ground-based tracking and all the eyewitnesses? And so he hemmed and hawed a little bit, and then he said, well, maybe it was remote control. I said, get your story straight. It's one or the other. You can't have it every way. You got to provide some proof for what you accuse things of. You just can't just blurt it out. So I got to agree with astronaut Aldrin. And I know, if you look at the book Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, written by Maurice Chatelain, he was the patent holder for dozens of the designs of the telecommunication system for Apollo. And in his book, he states chronologically all the space flights, all the astronauts that saw UFOs on every mission, and how they came about going to the moon, how music had been piped in from alien sources into the command module, and how they were followed along the entire way. And he's not the only one. Astronaut Gordon Cooper talked about it. In fact, his book, Leap of Faith, talks extensively about it. Edgar Mitchell, Brian O'Leary, I mean, the list is there, endless too. The trouble is with people is that they want everything on a plate. And that plate has to be aesthetically pleasing to them. They don't want to have to think. They want somebody who supposedly has a position of authority to tell them what is and what isn't. And that's the trouble with this civilization. It continues to go away from self-thought and go more and more to just accepting what they're being told. And that can be very destructive.
So with the population today, then, who does not believe that any of this happened, how do you forge their way of thinking to believe that it actually did? Because people today are very hard to convince one way or another, even if it's the truth.
Well, first of all, it's not our job to change anybody's thinking. They got to change their own thinking. What I try to do is I try to provide people with information. And that information then either inspires self-thought or it doesn't. I'm not here to convince anybody of anything. They've got to do that themselves. And so when you have people that are so ardently against a particular thought, no matter what evidence you provide for them, they don't want to accept it. Why waste your time? They either come about it on their own or they don't. And if they don't, well, that's life. So once again, this is not a crusade to change the world's thinking. We got to do that ourselves. We got to fix our own problems and not expect somebody else to do it for us. And I think that anybody who claims to have somewhat of an open mind, if you sit down there and present both sides to any argument, then if you have rational people, then you have rational interaction. And if you have irrational people, well, then you don't bother.
We only got about 5 minutes here before we have to go to our first break. A very fast hour indeed. I got a question from Bob. And Bob is asking, NASA claims we can't go back to the moon because they lost, or we can't go back to the movies because they lost the tapes. They went there originally for... sorry, Bob's writing is... Bob, I have to explain Bob for a second. Bob is my voiceover guy, and he is in the hospital right now, paralyzed. So he has troubles typing with his fingers to get the right words out on his iPad, so I do apologize for that. But he's saying NASA claims basically that they don't have any movies because they lost the original tapes and they are gone. Where do you think they are? Or do you buy that story?
Well, first of all, let's wish Bob the best of luck on his convalescence and hope for a speedy recovery, because that's the most important thing. Secondly, I've never seen NASA claim they lost any tapes. In fact, if you look at enough documentaries, you will find enough moon footage, not only of all the programs that I mentioned earlier, but also of the Apollo, and they are available to media sources as composed documentaries, in which I've done collaboration with dozens of these ones worldwide over the period of the last 25 years. And so, as far as their tapes are concerned, they've got enough of them available, and whatever tapes they don't want to release, well, then they don't want to release them. There must be a reason behind that. And I think that when we look at some of these investigatory programs that looked at into the Shuttle STS programs, in which they show films of these craft in orbits and us shooting projectiles at them and things like that, I still think that there's a whole lot of tangible quality information out there. I think NASA is more than willing to go back to the moon. We're looking at mining the moon, helium-3, all the elements. We can build a spacecraft a lot easier there in that environment as well for a launching point. I think the moon is always on NASA's mind. It's a matter of funding, public support, in which there is little to none, and so they got a tough job to do too. And also, if we do have a secondary space program, which many of us believe there exists, then there is a certain amount of shall we say, trying to keep things on the QT so that we don't have these two conflicting. I've heard reports that when our astronauts got to the moon, they were a bit upset to find that their own compatriots had already been there and were still there. And so, there's many sides to many pieces of this story.
Well, we're going to get into a lot of that in hour number 2. I want to sneak one more question here as we have about 2 minutes left. Kim from Twitter at #SpacedOutRadio is asking, do you think the astronauts saw extraterrestrials when they got to the moon the first time?
Yes. In fact, one of the pictures in our book, Alien Bases on the Moon, is an Apollo picture in which the elliptical illuminated device is hanging right over the Apollo astronaut's head as the other one's taking the picture. And many companies have used the pictures out of our book, and they are public domain, but they never give credit to the source, ever, because they are always very negative about George Adamski, and they found that we are not, for very good reasons. And but the book we have has 100 NASA pictures, all with their serial numbers, and you have to order them just like everybody else, and you got to pay for them. That's how we did it, and that's how it still exists that way. So I think that the answer is absolutely yes.
Ken Johnson was on this show, former NASA employee, who said that he believes that on that emergency stream, Neil Armstrong sent something along the lines of, "They are here, they are on the hill, and they are watching us."
Yeah, I've heard of that too. I've heard of Lovell talking about when they circled the moon that Santa Claus does exist. That the fact that there's a whole bunch of coded phrases or switching to different frequencies. And there's also the 5-second delay through the telemetry there through Houston. So they have the ability to censor out what they need to do when they need to do it. So as Marie Chatelain said, and many of the astronauts themselves said, we've seen them, we know them to be true and to be factual, and there's no doubt.
You think then NASA is airbrushing photos then?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, when my father went before the 22 scientists and got our spaceflight center, he walked by a door that had a sign on it called Retouch Department. And my father said to the MC that was escorting him through, he says, "What do you need this for?" And the guy just smiled and put his fingers to his lips like the quiet sign and kept walking. So absolutely, airbrushing is going on. In fact, when we look at the Face on Mars photographs there that came out by Molinar and the other fellow Hertek in the 70s, you can see that most definitely later pictures of it have been wiped.
Glenn Steckling is our guest on Spaced Out Radio tonight. We're talking about the moon landings, UFOs, extraterrestrials. We got 2 hours to go with Glenn, who is part of the Adamski Foundation. A great talk. We're going to take more of your questions as well. Make sure you put them in capital letters if you are in one of the chat rooms or on Twitter. I do not want to miss them. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I am your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back right after this.
Find your escape where time has no limits. It's about living today and cherishing the heritage of yesterday. A spirit of adventure for what is new, with the nostalgia of the past. Your timepiece is a reflection of who you are. Life surrounded by beauty from the world around us to the soul within. EscapeWatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
The freedom to post what you want, when you want. That's the social media freedom you need. Social Media Freedom is the free app in your app store. No need to worry about going to jail or being shadow banned any longer. It's the freedom to say what you feel. The freedom to know Big Brother isn't watching. It's the way social media is supposed to be. Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free. Download from your app store today.
Coming September 28th to the 30th, it's our first annual Caribou Paracon, put on by Spaced Out Radio and the Canadian Society of Questers. 3 days of paranormal, supernatural, and spiritual knowledge in the beautiful 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Tickets are $150 Canadian for the event, being held at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Come watch our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Lorian Fenton, David Weatherly, Ross Allison, and more. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
Hey Space Travelers, it's Joe Roop, your host of Spaced Out Saturdays. Come join me as we explore the realms of the paranormal, the esoteric, and everything in between every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern. You know the truth is out there. Don't get caught sleepwalking. Come join Spaced Out Saturdays. That's every Saturday night, 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, right here on spacedoutradio.com.
Hi there, this is Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm going to take you for a ride every Sunday night on Spaced Out Sundays. I'm going to set up your week with some strange tales from across North America, from psychic readings, Sasquatch, UFOs, to the most haunted locations. Come join me at spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, and let's get weird together. I'd love for you to join me. Spaced Out Sundays at spacedoutradio.com.
365 days a year, we're in the field, investigating UFO sightings, talking to alien abductees, and visiting secret military locations like Area 51. We're UFO Seekers, official partner of Spaced Out Radio. Follow our daily search for the truth at ufoseekers.com or like us on social media. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
It's paranormal news at its finest. Welcome to The Encounter. At spacedoutradio.com, The Encounter online is SOR's trusted news source for everything weird and strange going on around the world. This is news editor Eric Markham. Our team of journalists are scouring the planet for those strange stories that rarely make the mainstream. No fear-mongering or fake news here. Head over to spacedoutradio.com and encounter The Encounter.
Heading to Vancouver and looking for some great nightlife? The Moose Vancouver is the place to be. Catch a game on one of the big screens or just come rock out to your favorite 80s and 90s hair bands. Great food starting at $6.95. The Moose Vancouver is open until 2 a.m. nightly. It's easy to find near the corner of Nelson and Granville. The Moose Vancouver is the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Want to learn more about aliens, cover-ups, conspiracies, cryptids, and the paranormal? All you have to do is tune in S4 as we take over Spaced Out Radio Night, starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday night, right after Spaced Out Saturdays. Hi there, this is Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. Join me, Corey Ruiz, and friends as we discuss the hot topics of the night. It's fun, entertaining, and as dark as the night. Find us at spacedoutradio.com.
Are you interested in advertising on Spaced Out Radio? Head to our website at spacedoutradio.com and click on our advertising tab. There, you will find an assortment of ways you can get your product out there with us, from radio commercials to banners and social media. Have a product you like our hosts to endorse? We can do that too. Visit spacedoutradio.com for more details.
Do you want to know what's really going on in your world? Do you have questions about who you can trust in the mainstream media? Then look no further than the Rebel Planet. Come get the straight answers right here at spacedoutradio.com. Join me, Jamie Sexton, creator of Rebel Planet News, as I fill you in on the stories behind the stories. All you truth seekers, be sure to tune in to Rebel Planet on spacedoutradio.com the third Thursday of every month.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. Would you like to connect with us? Head to spacedoutradio.com for all your latest show info. And hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag SpacedOutRadio. Now, back to Dave Scott and SOR.
Welcome back to the second hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, we're staying in space. We're going to talk the Secret Space program with one of my favorite guests. He's only been on once. Got to meet him at the UFO Con in San Francisco, Michael Schratt. And if you haven't heard from him, go on YouTube. Type in Michael Schratt. SH, make that SCHRATT, and check out some of his speeches. The guy is incredible. That's tomorrow night, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We want to welcome in everyone listening in on the SOR Radio Network, including the Fringe.fm. We are live on Periscope.tv every Monday through Friday night. And if you're looking for our archives, all you got to do is go over to youtube.com/Spaced Out Radio. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button. I would appreciate that. And you can check out our archives for free. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Mankini is your password. Make sure you use it wisely, Space Travelers, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to check out our website, spacedoutradio.com, we got a plethora of features for you. You can rock out to some Bumblefoot, shop at our Spaced Out Radio store, read up on the encounter online, or watch great videos from UFO seekers, Contact TV, and so much more. Tonight, we are talking about the moon landings from the Adamski Foundation. We have Glenn Steckling here tonight to fill us all in. Now, Glenn is a believer that the moon landings did happen. Glenn, right before the break, as we bring you back in here, we were talking about whether or not aliens were following the Apollo missions. Now, a story that I actually read a number of years ago, way before I actually ever thought of Spaced Out Radio and hadn't even had a real UFO experience at that point, I read a story that said that NASA knew that every rocket they sent up, from Gemini to Apollo, even to the Shuttle missions, have always been watched by UFOs. Have you heard this story?
Yes, that's correct. As I mentioned with Maurice Chatelain's book, Our Ancestors Came from Outer Space, he chronologically listed all the missions and all the encounters that happened. In fact, I have a very large archive of the reports from those years and decades, as well as, and a lot of that information was published in Look magazine and other magazines, Scientific American and what have you, having to do with these extraterrestrial crafts and some of the photographs that the astronauts took. And so I think that it's very clear that in our fledgling years, and we're still in them, to be real, of going into space, that those who have mastered that technology, and let's not kid ourselves, to travel the reaches of space successfully is thousands of years of technology ahead of us. We are highly disconnected from the reality of traveling the distances. When you go out into space and you get far enough away from the Earth, and you are surrounded in a three-dimensional cube of stars all around you, there is no warp speed, Scotty, and beam me ahead and all this other nonsense. You got to know what you're doing. You're traveling through a moving medium in which all the planetary bodies and all the celestial forms are also moving. You have storms in space. You have magnetic fluxes and influences. And so you have to know exactly how to chart your way through these areas and how to travel the reaches and distance in space. And it actually takes thousands of years of doing this type of traveling to chart out maps in order to be able to know where you're going and how you're getting there. So in truth, we're really in our infancy going to the moon and, perhaps to Mars, and we send our probes out into the solar system and what have you. But the technology that is required for them to come here is massively ahead of us. And of course, then there's been some talk of re-engineering some of the crash technology that helped us to leap forward as well. I remember when Dr. Herman Oberth, who was the father of rocketry, was asked in an interview, he says, what do you attribute the vast leap in technology and success? He says, we've had help. And they asked him, help? What kind of help? He pointed up to the sky. He says, help from up there. And so he's not by far the only scientist who talked about that. My God, the list goes on and on and on. Some of that you can find on our website. We list these people and their statements and their backgrounds, and we have a very detailed, I think 7 or 8 page download PDF chronology that kind of gives people a background history of events of how they happened in our history and the coinciding UFO events as well. Up in Canada, where you're at, and I was born in Canada, although I didn't live there very long. I still have relatives there, and my fiance's from there. You had Project Magnet, and Wilbur Smith was a scientist involved with that. And in fact, Adamski gave him some pieces of one of the spacecraft, one of the flange pieces, to analyze. And Smith talked about it, although he didn't say where he had gotten it from. But George didn't care. It wasn't a matter of promoting his name, but to advance science. And you've had instances there, one air show where a injured airplane was escorted by a UFO, being held in its magnetic field and setting it down in the middle of the airfield. And the military quadrant it off and confiscated all the film, and this was in the 50s as well, from everybody who was there. So, and of course, you have a large open spaces of non-radar environment, and I've seen traveling from Alaska across the Canadian wilderness, down there, tens of thousands of miles of wilderness. Sometimes you'll see some very interesting things out there, flying objects and luminescent objects and things like that. So. And that's true no matter where you go in the world, in more, shall we say, open, uninfringed areas. Some areas of South America like that. I've seen some stuff over the Brazilian jungle, coming across the Siberian plateau, doing polar flights across the North Pole over Siberia and then into China. So there's still wide open spaces on this planet where it's easy access and egress without having the watchful eyes of Space Command and all the military weapons pointed at them.
Bob asked a question in the first hour, and I apologize. I kind of butchered it. I really did butcher it. So I apologize, Bob. I'm going to get to his question again here. He says about the data tapes. NASA went there originally in a tin can, there being the moon. Why didn't they go there with the shuttle craft? With that high technology, the shuttle never flew more than about 400 miles above Earth.
That's correct, because the shuttle is not designed to go further than that. When you look at the nature of traveling from the Earth to the moon, first of all, you have to realize you launch into orbit, and then you do multiple orbits around the Earth in order to accelerate to a certain apogee and then to burn and slingshot yourself to the moon. And so you're fighting against the gravitational system of the Earth till you get to the L1 point, which is about 45,000 miles from the moon. The moon's gravity takes over and pulls you towards the moon. But you also remember that things are in motion. So you launch into orbit around the Earth. You do 2 or 3 orbits before you slingshot to the moon. And like anything else with trajectory, you're pointing to a spot in space where the moon's going to be in 3 days when you get there. So it takes very precise planning. And then you have to be able to not only break the grip of the Earth's pull, but then slow down sufficiently so that by the time you get into the moon's pull, you don't have excess acceleration that will slingshot you around the backside of the moon and often an opposite direction. So the whole calculations and computations are quite extensive. And remember, your laptop today has more computing power than all of NASA's machinery that existed during the Apollo program. All right, so that it took quite a feat of scientific prowess to get there, and then to get you back. And then the space shuttle, which came along in the 70s, I believe 74, it was designed only to be boosted into orbit, and then it maintains and contains a very short supply of fuel to get it to a certain particular orbit, let's say 200 miles, in order to do a low orbit situation or to meet up with the space station. And it's not designed to go further into space. It doesn't carry the fuel nor the capabilities. You have to have sufficient oxygen and oxygen scrubbers and so on and so forth. So there are two entirely different mission scenarios and 2 entirely different designs. If we were designing something today, which we're in the process of doing as well, because they are talking about going back to the moon, Then you're looking at a command module that has 5 occupants. It is, of course, constructed of the newest titanium compositions. Of course, the computers are astronomically different. Command control systems, so much different today than it was then. I mean, go to the Smithsonian and look at Friendship 7, which Glenn orbited in that little capsule that he was in. And then you look at the Apollo command module. I think it was Apollo 8 that's in there, too. I mean, that's some ancient stuff. That's some Model T Fords comparing to what we got today. So I am very hopeful that we will use our technology and this time not deny it, the fact that we're doing it and then denying the benefits of it by going and reaching out into space. The idea, once again, is that once you reach out into space, which is our last natural frontier, and it joins us up with our common brethren that are out in space as well, so it'll fortify our understanding of science, it fortifies our understanding of religion and creation, it breaks us away from the oppressive constant manipulation of economies and wars and things like that we maintain on this planet, and that's one of the major reasons why we keep space within a tight grasp of a very few, in order to make sure it doesn't change our world too quickly. But that's really not our greatest danger. Our greatest danger is overpopulation. That will be the demise of our civilization more than anything else.
One of the big questions that a lot of people bounce around today, and we've even heard people from Elon Musk mention it, NASA has mentioned it, everybody seems these days once again to fear the Van Allen belt. And yet, and then back then, when we had worse technology, worse building supplies, less skill, everything was not as renowned as it is today. They weren't as worried about it. And yet,
right. There's reasons for this. First of all, I've heard this innuendo slung around as well. We can't go beyond the orbital sphere of the Earth because of the Van Allen belt. So I asked one guy, what is the Van Allen belt? He didn't have an answer, and the answer is simple. It's charged magnetic particles. Charged magnetic particles are surrounding you here by the tune of about 15,000 per square inch around you every day of your existence. Why is charged particles going to keep you from going beyond the sphere of the orbit of the Earth? It's nonsense. Not only have we proven it, but we've also shot deep space. We've shot probes to the other planets. I mean, once again, somebody takes a thing, makes an accusation, gives absolutely no credible reason why they say that's so or how it could be so. It's just going to let's pretend it's that way. And that is unbelievable. But actually it's not, but it is in my mind because it's so ridiculous. But that's what happens in this UFO field. Let's shoot an innuendo out there. Let's get as much traction, notoriety, or profit and marketeering off of it, and then let's confuse a bunch of people because nobody's held accountable for what they say. I find it so interesting that so many people in this field believe in the principle of karma. If they truly would believe in the principle of karma, they wouldn't spread around so much garbage that they are, because the payback is going to be hell one of these days.
Do you believe the radiation of the Van Allen belt is really something that our astronauts do not need to worry about, especially with the advanced technology that is in place today?
Well, first of all, radiation comes in many different forms. The sun doesn't give off heat, it gives off radiation. The radiation falls on the plasma waves that emanate from the sun, and a series of molecules. Some of them are radiation waves that go right through the planet and out the other side, go right through your body and out the other side. You have an ionosphere that when we first measured it showed that the temperature of the Earth was 1,100 degrees Celsius. Well, we found out obviously we were bouncing off the ionosphere, which is the protective layer for the other radiation types that come through here. And so when we look at radiation, it has to have a medium in which to interact. And so, yes, there's a certain amount of shielding in the crafts. Actually, the low gravity for long periods of time is much more detrimental to the human form than we give it credit for. And we could produce crafts or space station that revolve. If you want to mention Kubrick, there's a great example of a space station that revolves, because when you spin, you produce artificial gravity. People no longer have to live in a non-gravity state, which atrophies bone and biological functions and things like that. So we have a great deal of technology. We have a great deal of ability. And the only reason we don't do it is because everything is based on the bottom line of the dollar bill. And really, all it is a piece of paper with green ink that's worth 1/100th of what they tell you it is. And so the radiation which surrounds the planet, you've got radiation traveling through space on waves. That's not going to keep a physical object from moving through the medium. That's like saying that you dive in the ocean and surrounded by water and you can't move through the water. Of course you can. So once again, a little bit, just a tiny bit of research gives you an explanation of what the Van Allen radiation belt does. It's a byproduct of the electromagnetic field of the planet and how it functions. And when you see that, you know damn well that the rest of this accusations is garbage.
Catherine is asking, if we didn't fake the moon landing, well, why do they have different location shots with the exact same backgrounds? Or so it seems.
Well, first of all, the big question is, why do they go to the most desolate areas, whether it's the moon or whether it's Mars, in order to set down their probes? In the moon's case, when you look at the landing zones, you're on the front side of the moon where the atmosphere is the thinnest. And so only during specific times will you get reflection off the haze of that. And so it's like saying, if I sit down in Death Valley and I film the area around me, and then I go to, Utah somewhere and film there, why does it look relatively the same? Well, because you have the same basic kind of environment. You've got low hills, you've got the same type of composition of the materials on the surface, and so on and so forth. You add the factors all together, and you're going to get a certain commonality, not any different than if you go here and do the same thing. And in fact, in 2006, we did we put up the experiment in the Atacama Desert, and we used the same instrumentation that we sent to Mars. And for people who don't know where that is, that's in South America, down towards Chile. And our instrumentation set up in the Atacama Desert said there's no life on this planet. Now, this is the same stuff we sent up into space. And we can talk about calibration errors and data manipulations later on in the program. But the idea here is you go into a commonality field, whether it's the Atacama Desert or the Sahara, whatever, everything's going to start looking pretty much relatively the same as well. So, the moon has a greater diversity on the backside, which is not so susceptible to the gravitational pull of the Earth on the front side. And so conditions are a bit different there.
I want to get back to the Apollo missions for a while, because there is a lot of speculation and, once again, a conspiracy theory that the last three missions, 18, 19, and 20, and some believe a 21, actually took place rather than it ending after Apollo 17. What is your theory on that?
There has been some talk that there were several more missions that were conducted out of launch sites in equatorial region that is in the Far East, and so that by the time the launch vehicle reached high-altitude orbit by the western United States, it was already in orbit, so there was no burn to watch as it went up there into space. It would have already reached it by that time. And I think to some degree that has some credence to it, that we did continue on. We have to understand that nothing stops. Nothing. I mean, look at this UFO field. They tell you there's nothing to study, the government, right? You've got Project Sign, Project Saucer, Project Azuma, Blue Book, the Condon Report. God, there's a dozen more that I can't think of off the top of my head. These are just the ones they tell the public. Now, are you going to create dozens of studies for something that doesn't exist? And do you think that all of a sudden the studies just cease to exist and it doesn't continue on once they're collecting data and once they're trying to figure out what's going on? Of course it does. Our technology just doesn't stop on a dime either. The technology that you see today, to a greater extent, was developed 20 years ago. And stuff that we are doing today also has some far-reaching momentum forward as well. So a lot of people say, well, we don't have the technology for this and we don't have the technology for that. I got news for you. We got high-powered lasers. We've got magnetic pulse machines, infrared projectile. We got all kinds of stuff that the people aren't aware of. And they're not going to tell because we have this political cat and mouse game going between nations so that one doesn't have what the other one has and so on and so forth. This constant facade of a power struggle on the surface.
So do you think there were hidden missions, maybe another project after Apollo, in order to check out high-ranking places, maybe gone to different planets, Venus, Mars, or checked out other moons? Do you think we've pushed it that far, or do you think that's all beautiful speculation?
Alternative 3 talked about us going to Mars much earlier than we officially said we had, and that is by using some of the recovered technology that we have gotten from recovered spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. And as we mentioned earlier, that when our astronauts got there, they found to their chagrin that their own people were already there too, so it wasn't the first step for mankind, but it made great PR. And I don't think that they knew it either till they got there, because they weren't told everything either. So we have gone with not only with conventional, but I believe we have developed non-conventional or electromagnetic devices already since, shall we say, well, I know of some of the models that were being developed in the 50s that were still attached to their electrical power source. By the 60s, they had managed to self-contain the power source. By the 70s, we were going into orbit with these things and to the moon. So I think we have two different types of space programs. The fallacy is that we believe that one hand knows what the other one's doing. The circumstances on this world are like an onion, multi-layered. The top peripheral is the political system that you're accustomed to. These people in Washington, the Congress of Senators, they don't know anything of what's going on. And when they make you a promise, like Mrs. Clinton did, well, I'm going to open all the files, she doesn't even have access to the files. The last president to have full access was Kennedy. And Johnson had a little bit, and Nixon had a little bit, and from that point on it stopped, although Carter had his own experiences when he served on the submarine of seeing a UFO, and he actually put in a full report about that. So the idea that when we look at our legislative people that they know what's going on, they haven't a clue. And then underneath that, you have a certain contingent of people that have a little bit more information, but not everything. We also have this fallacy that if you're a highly commissioned military officer, colonel, general, admiral, whatever, then you have access to everything, and that's a fallacy as well. I had a good friend of mine now passed away. He used to work in procurement for the Pentagon, had to go in front of Congress for their budget needs and what have you. He had seen these crafts while he served in Korea and also over the United States as a military officer. But as far as further information than that, he didn't have access to it. So you have to go deep within the concentric circles of what's going on to even get close to people knowing. And even that is a very small number. We use these organizations like the Illuminati and all these other secret organizations. When you know about them, they're not so secret. And when they're not so secret, then they're also able to bait you like a fish and go a certain direction. The truly secret organizations have no names and just faces. And these are the people that know what's going on. And this is also a group of people that's multinational, including some that may not also be from this world as well.
So are you a firm believer then that there has been, for say the last 50 years, 60 years, a secret space program that has taken us all over this universe.
I believe yes, I would say that I am a believer, and I believe that there is a sufficient amount of evidence to back that part, at least for the Moon and the Mars, and perhaps Venus. I don't know if we've gone much further than that into the solar system. Our capabilities as far as space travel of greater distances and maneuvering through asteroid belts and things like that still has a lot to be desired. But I would say within this sphere of this asteroid belt, between the Sun and Mars, yes, I believe we have definitely continued our exploration for multiple reasons. First of all, we are concerned about the conditions on this planet. To some degree, it's false PR. The push by Musk and some of these people to say, well, let's go to Mars and rehabilitate Mars and make it a colony. Really, that's just a fantasy. That's a sucker's game. Because when you look at the environment of the Earth, and you look at the oceans, and you look at the different climates, and you look at the entire ecosystem of the Earth, it's 1,000,000 times more than Mars is at this particular moment. What Mars was in the past, well, that's still up for debate. But currently, what it would take to rehabilitate an entire planet, why would you waste your time when you're already living on one that is a Garden of Eden? Right? And so there, once again, it's a million tangents. And unfortunately, truth is something that is often just simply kicked to the wayside.
I'm not sure about the secret space program if we've gone that far. I mean, I want to believe. I really do, because I think it's just absolutely fascinating that we could have bases on Mars, and I hear people, whether it's Corey Good or Captain K, saying they've spent time on Mars in some sort of military group up there fighting aliens. Like, to me, that just geeks me out. I absolutely love that. I want to believe that it's happening. But to think that we did this 50, 60 years ago when we were nowhere as advanced as we are technologically wise as we are today, it is hard to fathom.
Well, remember, how far were we really technologically advanced? Once again, just because you see a Buick on the road doesn't mean that there's a different make and model that's a much better car, right? So you are seeing the public relations front of what is being conducted. But let us just for a moment ponder. Let us ponder on the fact that between Roswell, Cortez, Socorro, Alamogordo, which I know of at least 3 completely intact crafts that were recovered, that the technology has been looked at and replicated. And in fact, to tell you the truth, today on UFO sightings, at least 50% is our own crafts that are manufactured by multiple different agencies and governments on this planet. So we have developed electromagnetic propulsion, but we have done it at different levels. So if you look at, let's say, the Air Force, and they're working at the Skunks Works or Area 51 where they developed the U-2 and the SR-71, and you look at the Aurora project, you see a natural progression through the principles of aerodynamics, which is something that we have developed over the last century, right? And they continue to try to refine that. But we haven't used that knowledge to step beyond aerodynamics. And until we step beyond aerodynamics by enveloping the craft in its own unified field, do we go past the point of having to accelerate an airfoil and create lift and produce drag. And so you have this one group that's working on refinement of existing ideas. Then you have another group that's working with some partial technology that recovered from somewhere else, or trying to do a combination of aerodynamics and nuclear power, like the Aurora projects, and then moving from that into hypersonic, into space, and what have you. And so you have different factions from different governments and different military services, each working intently on their particular aspect, not necessarily sharing information or sharing labor or sharing the momentum of going a particular direction. In fact, we are used to the fact that every man for himself kind of concept. And so the technology to go into space and to go to the moon and Mars already was prevalent by the end of the late 60s. But that doesn't mean that they are going to suddenly scrap all the momentum from Mercury and Gemini and Apollo, because this is the public face of the space program. And hopefully one of these days they had planned to merge the two of them into a combined force, a combined project, and a forward momentum. But at this particular point, we haven't done that because, once again, we do not want to elevate the education and the thought processes of the masses of the people.
Glenn, it always comes down to proof. A lot of people can speak on these topics and say, I believe it's happening. But do we have any proof that the public can go on? We know there's billions upon billions of dollars, maybe even trillions, that are just written off the books on black projects. I mean, let's face it. I mean, it really doesn't cost or cannot cost $24 million to put 2 fridges in Air Force One. You know what I'm saying?
No, that's correct. But that's another issue all combined. You have your national budget that comes out every year, and that budget's what, $1.3 trillion. But we also know that there is a black ops budget, which is not controlled or overseen by Congress, does not require legislative approval, and nobody talks about it. But we know it exists because even they talk about it. And the rumor is that it is once again the equivalent of the entire budget combined. So now 1.3 becomes 2.6. Now, in order to balance the books, as any accountant will try to tell you, is you got to make the numbers match. How do you make the numbers match unless you inflate a particular item? So in other words, if I tell you it costs $10,000 for a toilet cover, then the numbers start to match, and most people don't line item examine a budget. And so, consequently, at the end of the last page, the two numbers match, outbound versus inbound expenditures, all is good. So they are trying to make the numbers for the public to be, and for the government, the echelons of government, to seem reasonable without indicating where those monies are going to. And then all these programs can be funded by those additional monies as well. How do you think we got $20 trillion in the hole that you know of?
Well, it has to come from someplace.
That's right. It's got to come from someplace. And so consequently, you have an inflation of numbers and issues and things like that. Now, I can tell you, for specialized items, then, of course, especially when you're looking at Air Force One, the entire project is completely different. If you look at the acquisition of a 747, let's say $200 million, that's for the straight airplane passenger configuration. Now you have to replumb the entire thing, reshield the entire thing, all the new technology that goes in there, all the equipment that has to be tested and approved in there. Everything goes up dramatically as far as price is concerned. And then you have to understand that all the suppliers and manufacturers are gouging the hell out of the American taxpayer. And the people who are spending the money don't care because it's coming from us and not their pockets. And so consequently, the price of something goes up dramatically. It's like saying a bolt from the hardware store costs you $1.25, but that same bolt, which you don't want to use in an airplane to hold your wing up, is going to cost you, $10,000 because it has to be specifically constructed, tested, X-rayed, magnafluxed. It's an entirely different animal, different ball of wax. So sometimes the layman's comparison is not justifiable.
Why haven't we been back to the moon?
Well, I think we both feel what we have. And I think we just haven't done so publicly because, once again, the the information that comes from going there is of greater exposure. So the more people you have involved, the more exposure becomes probable. Thus, the push to go into robotics, to go into space. Robotics can be programmed. Calibration errors and factors can be inserted. You have no human eye witness to worry about talking about when it comes back. So while automation is good in some respects as far as the danger is concerned, it's not good when it comes to the human experience that is required with going with this particular adventure into the field, the experiences from that. And of course, no machine can think and adjust and reequate and go about the process as the human mind and the human brain can. So going back to space with more people means more exposure, more contacts, and once again, that is infringing upon the overall suppression of information that exists globally on this world, right? Because let's face it, in fact, the astronauts have said that themselves. One of the greatest books I have here is the thoughts of the astronauts and cosmonauts while they were in orbit. And unifiably, they talk about the fact that once you're in orbit and you're looking down at the Earth, you're thinking of how precious the planet is, how we do things, how we squander our availability and our intelligence, and how we do things to detriment our own planet just defies logic. And the freedom of thought as you break away from the planet into orbit, and of course the experiences that you have while you're out there, totally enlighten those who've had the privilege of partaking in that. And if we do that more and more to a greater state, then we have less and less divisions on this planet. In other words, we got to go with the Russians to go up into the space lab, right? So whether we like the Russians or not, or communists or not, or what have you, all these things mean absolutely nothing. Ideology means nothing, because you are commonly reliant on each other, like you would be in the military, upon your brother or sister soldier to cover your six, and you are reliant on them for your survival. And so you have this common connection, and soon countries cease to exist, religions cease to exist, the differences upon which we divide our planet and our people cease to exist. This is one of the greatest things we could experience, but we don't want to do it too soon because we don't like giving our people that freedom of thought.
My theory on it is a little bit different. I honestly believe that we were either A, not asked to go back, or asked not to go back, or B, like you said, we're already there, we're already established with other countries, namely Russia, which I think down on this planet where all the posturing goes on between the United States and Russia, they both need each other for the exoplanetary work that they are doing together.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
And it does make sense, if I think a little bit more about this, it does make sense that Russia takes care of getting to the space station while the U.S. uses the TR-3Bs or whatever they have, allegedly, to travel to the moon and other destinations where there are bases. So that would make sense to me in regards to that.
Yes. Absolutely. We have been, what people don't realize is already since the 60s, we have been working collectively with the Russians in the space program. You had instant straight-line red phones between the scientists there at NASA and the ones in Russia, and they were changing and trading information and working together while we were beating the communist drum in order to brainwash the population of the people on both sides. And so once again, like I mentioned, this is like an onion with multi-layers of stuff that is going on in the peripheral, which has sometimes nothing to do with the stuff in deeper layers. And when people start to realize that, then they think, well, what kind of a stupid game are we playing? And that's exactly what it is, a stupid game.
So do you believe, then, that maybe we were told not to go back to the moon by extraterrestrials?
No. No, absolutely not, because it's with our domain. The moons of a planet are within the orbital domain of that planet, and that is within the rights of the people within that sphere of influence. The extraterrestrials are not going to tell you can't go to the moon, or you can't go anywhere else. In fact, they've done nothing more historically than come to encourage us to go out into space and to be part of that, and to interact. So, no. I mean, let's face it. Thousands of years of technology, they could have come here and whooped our hiney tens of thousands of years ago, and they could still do it today without even a blink. When you think about spacecraft that are 30 miles in length, I mean, already in 1871, the Royal Astronomical Society observed on the moon opaque, luminescent objects 10, 15 miles. We observed them almost 30 miles that covered the entire floor of the crater Aristarchus. I mean, a couple of these crafts come into the orbit of this planet, and that's it. They can do whatever they want, whenever they want to, and they don't do that. And that's not their thinking, because what we don't give credit to is the fact is that when you advance technologically, you are also advancing sociologically, also in intellect and thinking. So you don't have cavemen in Papua New Guinea running around flying 747s. They couldn't even conceive about building them, let alone operating them. And so the same extent exists out there. As civilization progresses, technology progresses, in some cases it outpaces the sociological development like we're experiencing now. We have this huge dichotomy and differential between the two, and that becomes very dangerous because in stupidity we use high technology to be highly destructive. But in their case, they have no intention of denying us anything. In fact, they welcome us to come out there. Absolutely, because how are we going to make the step that they made already thousands of years ago if we don't progress in that direction? So, once again, this concept of we're being told what to do and threaten not to do this or do that. I mean, let's face it. The enforcement of it would be far too easy, and the threats are just empty nonsense.
Well, let me ask you this then, in regards to the people, because it takes people to run these bases, whether it's on Mars, Venus, the moon, wherever in between. Have you ever talked to any of these people who are credible in your mind, who have allegedly spent time on one of these bases, or when you make a commitment to go to Mars or the moon, that you're there for life and there is no coming back? How does this work?
The latter. As far as my information is concerned, and that was already addressed in Alternative 3, that we were, shall we say, involuntary recruiting labor to go build moon bases, and it's a one-way ticket. Nobody's going to take you into a secret installation and then give you a nice round-trip ticket, come home to start blabbing about it. You may recall in the late 60s and 70s what was called the brain drain, where famous, highly specialist scientists and their families disappeared off the face of the planet. And so, to the information that I have been privy to, that once you are taken there, that is a one-way ticket. You're not given the opportunity to come back and blab.
So basically, these people who allegedly go missing, whether they're scientists, engineers, we see a lot of young people going missing who have, their whole life in front of them. You think that they are being taken against their will, or that they are volunteering to go?
Both. Because, in some circumstances, how often are you not told the truth when you are being recruited for a secret mission, and you're told, well, this and this is what's going to be. The dangers are downplayed or not the full information is given. What is our famous phrase, need to know? So in some respects, I believe that it's both involuntary labor and some that is voluntary that isn't aware of the fact that it's a one-way ticket. But to what I have been exposed to, nobody comes back.
Are these people then trying to consummate a new population up in these areas?
Well, I think what happens is first you have to have the labor to construct these particular environmental bases. You know, you're looking at a lot of it is tunneling out of, let's take the moon, for instance, tunneling out and honeycomb constructions and a lot of physical manual labor that's not necessarily all that pleasant. And so, shall we say that unless we've gotten to the point where we can use machines to do the majority of that, in the early days, I think we used involuntary labor. At this particular point, we may have progressed to the point of having machines doing a lot of that work. And as far as going there and staying there, you know, once they find out that they are going to be there and not coming back, well, then life has to adjust. People adjust to the life that is given to them. So it's not all that of pleasant a prospect if you think about it, when things could be done much more openly and much more voluntarily. But we do always a lot of clandestine things, and so it's not necessarily always that pleasant.
Can you name names in regards to people who you've known who have gone up there?
I will never divulge people's confidences, no. And for the people that were going there, they didn't come back. So it's really irrelevant. What difference if it's a Smith or a Jones or whatever, or Dave Scott or what have you? You know, it's nothing that you can tangibly prove. The person is no longer here, but how are you going to prove they're there? So I try to stay away from innuendo and stick to as much facts as possible so this field doesn't become more distorted than it is already.
You do realize, though, having that opinion about these humans up on working on the moon or Mars or wherever it may be, for the majority of the population, it sounds very far-fetched.
Well, yeah, of course, for the majority of the population, all kinds of things sound far-fetched. But that doesn't mean that, you know, like I say, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, their own research, their own exposure, and everybody is different. I can say that the next person will have different than I have thinking and exposure and experiences. And so, you know, once again, whether they are or are not is really of not the same consequence as the revelation of extraterrestrial visitations, the purposes behind it, the advantages behind it. I think that anybody who does grabs himself a telescope and takes a look at the moon and looks at these active areas, I think they'll see for themselves quite a bit of activity. And but of course that takes a little bit of finances, time, and dedication. But it's possible to see for themselves. And so, you know, it's just. I knew a guy in Phoenix who worked for the DOD in this particular field, and he outwardly admitted that he had, on the agreement of the government, contact with extraterrestrials. He worked on several patents. He's a retired aerospace engineer, and he set up a camera system through his telescope at the moon in which he recorded it straight to a tape through an automated system in which you can see some activity. And so the information is available and is out there. And once again, unless people are interested in space or this field or something a little bit beyond the day-to-day reality TV that's going on, then, you know, I still think there's plenty of good information and good experiences out there.
We only have about 3 minutes before we have to go to our final break of the night, and I want to continue on this topic of discussion. Do you believe, then, that even though we have humans, or that you say we have humans up on the moon, Mars, bases all over the place in our universe, or as working towards the close proximity of the sun, are we working there alone, or are we working there with extraterrestrials?
I believe that we work collaboratively as long as we're willing to work peacefully. So, in other words, we are welcomed with open arms as long as we act intelligently and non-aggressively. If we act aggressively, then things are being more and more quarantined. But I think that, at least I know from my own experiences and having met some of these individuals that take short-term work here and many different avenues. I knew one as a park ranger, one working in the State Department, another one was in the Archdiocese. They come here for a 2-year stretch of time, very much like the Peace Corps, and they live and work amongst us and for specific reasons and purposes. And so we are given the helping hand, and we are offered our heritage and rightful place amongst the rest of intelligent creation in the cosmos. And so as far as going out into deep space, we've done that with probes, but we have not done that with our own manned flights. But some of the individuals who have been taken along in spacecraft from the extraterrestrials have gone to further places. George Adamski in 1955 described his ride in the flying saucer in the mothership. He described the firefly effect in space already, 8 years before John Glenn did it in 1963. He traveled around the moon, described the atmosphere and volcanic activity, water, and the type of vegetation that was growing in certain places, which we like to add to the data that we provided in later research for the Alien Bases in the Moon book to show the collaboration and the congruent nature of the information that was reported from space already in the 50s by George Adamski. And he never went on a craft without seeing an individual from government or the military that he recognized and recognized him. So they were well aware of who he was, and he knew who they were. So it was collaborative effort in order to make the people of this world aware. George briefed Eisenhower, and he also had briefed Kennedy and had an access card to the White House, which he showed us when he came to Washington as well. So he was well known in circles, and to this day has created a huge amount of envy among those in the UFO circles who cannot even hope to ever attain a tenth of the access and information that was given him.
Glenn, I'm going to get you to hold on for the final time tonight. We're going to go to a break here. Glenn Steckling, part of the Adamski Foundation, is our guest tonight. We're talking about the moon, we're talking about aliens, and we'll get into George Adamski himself in hour number 3, plus the thought of the day. We got some interesting opinions there as well tonight. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio. I'm your host, Dave Scott. We'll be back right after this. Are you tired of being blocked, shadow banned, or placed in jail for simply posting your thoughts on social media? Social Media Freedom can take care of that for you. Social Media Freedom is the newest and one of the best free new apps that allows you the freedom to post what you want, when you want. It takes seconds to download from your app store. Come join the tribe at Social Media Freedom. It's time to set yourself free.
The first annual Caribou Paracon is happening September 28th to 30th in the 108 Mile Ranch, British Columbia. Brought to you by the Canadian Society of Questers and Spaced Out Radio. Come listen to our featured speaker, Grant Cameron, along with Elizabeth Anglin, Paisley Town, Mike Moran, Eric Cooper, and more. It's a 3-day supernatural adventure at the Spruce Hills Resort and Spa. Tickets for the weekend are $150 Canadian. The Caribou Paracon, celebrating everything paranormal.
A timepiece is a reflection of who you are, and what better way to show off the real you than with an Escape watch? Escape is a lifestyle brand accessorizing your days and nights. Choose to escape and create the life of discovery that you deserve. Dream, play, unite with your own personalized Escape watch. Head to escapewatches.com. There is no time like the present to enjoy your escape. Use promo code SMF2017 for your 20% discount today.
Looking for a place to advertise at a very reasonable cost? Look no further than Spaced Out Radio. SpacedOutRadio.com has an advertising tab that you can click to check out our daily, weekly, and monthly packages to play on the radio, or our website including social media. From commercial spots to banners, we have it all. Check out our competitive pricing today.
We are lighting the void on Saturday nights on Spaced Out Radio. Hey, this is Joe Roop, and I'm hanging out in SOR headquarters every Saturday night, bringing you the latest news when it comes to the weird and strange. Bigfoot, occult, UFOs, ghosts, and everything in between, I got you covered. You can tune in to spacedoutradio.com starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time. Come travel into the void with us on Spaced Out Saturdays.
Not ready for bed on Saturday night? Right after Spaced Out Saturdays, hop on over to S4 with Corey Ruiz and me, Eric Cooper from Forest Moon Paranormal. With S4, there are no limits to what we try and uncover. From government conspiracies to helping clean up the paranormal, no topic is safe on S4. We get to the heart of the matter, of the subjects you want to learn more about. So tune in on S4 starting at midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern, only on spacedoutradio.com.
Are you intrigued by Paranormal Talk Radio? You'll love the new Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live. You'll find a great selection of talk shows covering UFOs, ghosts, strange phenomena, and much more. Download the Paranormal Radio app now and start listening to the very best in paranormal talk entertainment, including the network you're listening to right now, the Paranormal Radio app, free in Google Play and the iOS App Store.
The Call of the Wild is in Vancouver. The Moose Vancouver is one of the hottest bars and restaurants in the city. Open until 2 a.m. nightly, the Moose will rock you like a hurricane all night long. Great food with everything on the menu at $6.95 near the corner of Nelson and Granville. Get your horns up and come rock with us. The Moose Vancouver, the official rocking bar of Spaced Out Radio.
Visit purpleplates.com today. For over 40 years, the Purple Energy Plates have been delivering amazing results for their many customers. Inspired by the great genius Nikola Tesla, the harmony, healing, and energetic effects of the plates have proven over and over to be beneficial and often miraculous to thousands of customers. Check their site for daily specials and choose from their many energy products. You won't be sorry. Visit them today at purpleplates.com.
This is Eric Markham, news editor for the Spaced Out Radio's The Encounter Online. We have put together a great team of writers and journalists from all over the world to bring you top-quality paranormal stories, from alien encounters to the latest conspiracies. You won't find any of that fake news here. True stories and top-notch reporting as we look to bring these experiences to the mainstream. The Encounter Online, only at spacedoutradio.com.
Do you want to know the truth? Do UFOs exist? Are aliens real? Are the governments hiding the biggest secret in history? We're UFO seekers, and we're on a hunt for the truth. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow along with us as we journey across the United States, visiting UFO hotspots and alien hotspots, trying to document the UFO phenomenon. Catch us on Spaced Out Radio every third Monday of the month as we discuss Area 51, UFOs, and more. And also, don't forget to subscribe to us on YouTube.
You hear footsteps in the empty room above you. A rocking chair begins rocking by itself. Don't be afraid of the things that go bump in the night. Reach for Spirit Storybox, the iPhone app the Huffington Post UK called the only ghost hunting app you will ever need. Spirit Storybox. The spirits are telling their stories.
From the mile-high state of Colorado, sharing our signal around the world, I invite you to Spaced Out Sundays. Hi, I'm Tessa Nicole Thomas, and I'm closing out the week by taking you on a paranormal journey to the world of the weird. Ghosts, aliens, psychic phenomena, I will hit it all in your questions too. So let us highlight the paranormal for you. So come join me for Spaced Out Sundays starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, 12 a.m. Eastern, only at spacedoutradio.com.
The views and opinions expressed by tonight's guest and topic of discussion do not necessarily represent the official policy or position of Spaced Out Radio, Spaced Out Weekend, Spaced Out Radio Limited, its hosts, syndicated carriers, or anyone associated with this broadcast. You're listening to Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Follow Dave on Twitter at Spaced Out Radio and hashtag Spaced Out Radio. and on Facebook, Spaced Out Radio Show. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back to the third and final hour of Spaced Out Radio tonight. I am your host, Dave Scott. Great to have you with us. Tomorrow night on the program, Michael Schratt will be with us. I booked him because we're leading up to my birthday show, and I like Michael. We're going to talk the Secret Space program and more starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern Time at spacedoutradio.com. We welcome in everyone listening in on the SOR radio network, including the Fringe.fm. You can also watch us live on Periscope.tv every Monday through Friday night, and we store our archives on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/spacedoutradio. If you want to connect with us live, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate that. Bill Cardwell has set the password for tonight in the SOR Space Travelers Club. Mankini. Mankini is your password for tonight, as Bill sets a password each and every night right here on the mighty SOR. Now, if you want to follow us on our website, spacedoutradio.com, we got a plethora of features for you. Rock out to some Bumblefoot, shop at our Spaced Out Radio store, read up on the encounter online, or watch great videos from UFO Seekers, Contact TV, and so much more. Tonight we are talking about the moon landings, UFOs, aliens, maybe a little secret space program. Glenn Steckling is our guest tonight. He is a part of the Adamski Foundation. Glenn, welcome back.
Good to be back with you.
We're having a lot of fun tonight with these topics. This has just been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for going the distance with us tonight.
Oh, absolutely. My pleasure. That's what I enjoy doing, and I have been given a lot of information and a lot of opportunity, and I believe it's my need to pass it along as much as possible to those who are willing to listen. Giving back, I guess that's what it's called.
Well, we're glad you're sharing it with us tonight. That makes it for a lot more fun in regards to it. Earlier in hour number 2, we were talking about why we haven't gone back to the moon. Do you think it is strictly financial, or do you believe that, as we were talking about these bases that are up there, we already got people up there, how are we getting those people up there if we do have bases?
Well, we're transporting them with newer means of technology. As we mentioned before, we have progressed into electromagnetics and the ability to use craft to go to the moon without the need of launch vehicles and rockets and rocket fuel and all of that, which is, of course, very noisy and very visible. The natural progression is to go to electromagnetics, and basically because the Earth is every planet, but if talking about our own, is a very large Van de Graaff generator that produces hundreds of trillions of volts and of free energy, in which we could tap into and use progressively to power everything. This would preclude the need for oil industry, coal, nuclear, and all of that. We continue to rummage around in those things because that's how we make money and profits and drive on our economies. But as far as making the leap forward, we are using those technologies for a select few and for select reasons. And so it wouldn't be very difficult to transport knowledgeable people and equipment and things like that to the moon. And of course, the moon itself has a great deal of minerals, helium-3, gold, titanium, things like that. So it once again is a natural place to do mining. And in fact, when you look into the book Alien Bases and some of the download pictures I sent you, some of the blow-ups show a small crater sitting above a larger one and a huge plume of material being poured from one to the other. Some of the craters are cut with terraces in them, and so on and so forth. So it looks like there's a great deal of mining activity going on the moon as well. And then, of course, we talked about the ability to construct in a lower gravity environment launch vehicles to go further out into space. So it's advantageous from many different aspects.
Do you think that it will come out in public that we've been going this long to the moon or to other places in space, maybe not in our lifetime, but in our children's or our grandchildren's lifetimes, that it'll come out that we've been doing this for this long?
It depends on the conditions on this world. As long as we continue to suppress societies and peoples and to propagate religious tensions and to create mini factions and wars for the supply and demand of manufactured military weapons and the military-industrial complex, as long as we continue this type of environment, then no, it won't, because once again, the admittance of space programs and giving people access will tear down these barriers and will change the aspect of how we conduct business on this world, and that changes a lot of things for many people. And most people don't want change. They're comfortable with what they have. They want to, have their secure retirement and their stock offerings and all these other things, which is all part of being a comfortable life, which is nothing wrong with, but we have tied them into aspects of certain businesses that are not necessarily very advantageous or very ethical. And so we have this great dichotomy between self-interest and general interest, or interest of the many versus the few. And while we continue to have this economic tier system, then I don't see that happening. Unless, of course, we get to a point of time where the space visitors come in greater numbers and basically force the issue by becoming more and more visible. But they also are very concerned about the repercussions of that as far as to the mental stability of the people. We don't understand that we are responsible for what we set into motion. We did it in our everyday lives. We're responsible for what we set into motion. And we try deftly to sidestep responsibility. And they don't live lives like that. They are ever constantly responsible. They examine from every corner the consequences of any particular action. That does not mean that they do not act. On the contrary, they act quite well. But they make sure that the consequences are leaning towards a more betterment or progressive state rather than a negative. So coming into the atmosphere with a 30-foot-long mothership is going to cause such panic and such destructiveness that in itself would be counterproductive, and they don't want to be responsible for that. So they are trying progressively to slowly inch our way there. And as long as we are working to work with them, fine. Here in the Western world, in the United States and some other countries, we do not want them. I give you an example. We went to Mexico from 69 to 72. George Adamski told us where there was a base that he had visited, and when he passed away, we purchased a piece of property near that area, and for 3 years we had sightings and interactions there. But on the first week we arrived, the Mexican military police showed up with 2 truckloads for the soldiers and all kinds of equipment. So the lead agent came in and asked to come in the house, and my father, always amiable, said, "Come on in." And he said, "We need to send my people out over the ranch, and we're going to be looking." And my father said, "Be my guest." And off they went with their electro prods and metal detectors and everything for a whole day. And my father said to the military commandant, he says, "This makes me kind of happy, because obviously you wouldn't look for something if you didn't think there was something to look for." And so the guy pointed to the picture, one of Adamski's pictures that we had hanging on the wall, and he says, "We know the extraterrestrials are here. We know they are good for us, but we don't want them." And he said to us, "We have your brief of your Pentagon file that was sent by the U.S. government, by the CIA, and we know what you're about and who you're in contact with, and you will be allowed to stay in this country as long as you do not go amongst the people and try to lecture and educate them." So that was just one little experience of many, many. So, and to a great extent, that's true in many places in the world. We don't want them. And in some places, we're a little bit more amiable and it shifts. In the 40s and 50s, it was here, and now it's not here anymore, and it's shifted over into Russia and South America. So, they go where they're wanted. I don't go into a house where people are throwing dishes at me either.
These aircraft that we are using to get to these alleged bases that are up there, and we're going to assume they are the TR-3Bs, the big black triangles that everybody believes they are. Where are they taking off from?
Well, that's a good point. First of all, yes, triangular-shaped devices are manufactured on this planet, not from outer space. In order to travel the reaches of space and use the propulsion system, they do not have crafts that have appendages, because under the speeds of magnetism, which is twice the speed of light, any appendages would rip off the craft no matter how strong the force field around it. So they stick to saucers and they stick to cigar-shaped craft because that is what their propulsion system is built to merge with, which is called prime merge, which is following along the magnetic lines of force. So triangular craft are manufactured on this planet. And where they launch from, well, that can be done in many different places. Everybody touts Area 51, but I can tell you that the majority of the really good stuff has been moved out of there already 25 years ago and moved to Alaska. But the military is not stupid. They leave a little activity there for the people who go and sit along the ridges so they don't think that if it all shuts down, the people start wondering, well, where did it go? And they start looking elsewhere. This way they stay with one hand looking at one thing and the other hand's doing something else. And so the ability, God knows, there's enough places in the United States or in the Canadian wilderness or in Alaska, South America. There are so many places that are easy launch places to go from that it could be anywhere. But and we can go there with mechanical devices too. We also have drones that are capable of going back and forth, and so or robotic devices rather than the drone, because everybody pictures a propeller. So a robotic device, what we call a registering disc, and so we have a multitude of capabilities, and so that's that. I mean, in reality, there's a lot of activity going around. It's a lot of it's ours, some of it's extraterrestrial, the majority of it's ours, and we are going about agendas and business as it has been planned for many decades.
Have we conquered the ability to use the same ability to travel through space, where it's alleged that these aliens and these alien craft are using wormholes in order to jump through time?
These are, once again, sci-fi concepts. We're not conscious of the different speeds that are available and the abilities to travel space. And so we come up with ideas of wormholes in order to satiate the long distances that we perceive. Now, first of all, we have to understand that we have mismeasured the distances, and this is by admission by our own astrophysicists. Things are not as far as we had originally thought, even though the distances are immense. Secondly, space is not warped and it's not folded over and so on and so forth, at least not from the civilizations that are traveling space for the last 10,000 years have found. And so we have to understand that to what's the word I'm looking for? To beam the human body, you can do that with a non-sentient form. You can teleportate a chair, a car, so on and so forth. But you cannot do it with a sentient form, because a sentient form has a soul and has a spirit. And you cannot dissemble that energy mechanically and transport it someplace. That doesn't exist. We attempted that with the Philadelphia project, where we had the destroyer and we transported it from one spot to the next, but all the crew members were dead. They were materialized back into bulkheads and things like that, and even the ones that were not, they were all dead, because you can transport an object, but you cannot transport the living sentient being. That's an entirely different thing. So there's no beam me up, Scotty. It's a lovely, lovely concept, but it's not reality. And wormhole travel, well, that's once again theory. Time travel, theory. But if you look at the natural principles, let's just take ancient Rome. Let's say you want to go back and sit with Julius Caesar. God forbid, he wasn't a very nice person anyway. All the molecules that composed his body, that time frame, and everything that composed that environment has been redistributed. One molecule can be in China, the other one can be inside of you, so on and so forth, spread all over the planet through the atmosphere. In order to reconstruct the past, you would have to totally disassemble the current, and that doesn't exist. These are fanciful notions. It has nothing to do with any reality. Now, if you are traveling space and you're going from a planet to the next planet in a different stage of development, let's say you came here during the time of the dinosaurs, you would see that particular time frame during a biological evolution. But that doesn't mean you traveled back in time 30 million years. You've just gone to a point of time where that development is still at that stage. And so this homogenization of our ignorances onto the reality of how nature works and the principles of the atoms and the molecules and the particles versus what we would like to perceive is two entirely different things. And I would think that we should come to a point where our educational system deals with the realities of how we're constructed and why we're constructed a certain way. Instead of all this nonsense we teach our children in school that has absolutely no value whatsoever in order to brainwash them and keep them babysat for 20 years. That is not how the civilizations in other worlds conduct themselves. If people are interested in knowing how that is done, then the book we released, Behind the Flying Saucer Mystery 2, is a combination of new information and also of George Adamski's third book, Flying Saucers Farewell, which talks about the civilizations on other worlds. I think they would find that very interesting, and they can find that online, ABE Books up there in Canada, or Amazon or eBay. We make it available all through there.
Danny is wondering in our Periscope chat room if you're at risk for talking about all this stuff.
No, absolutely not, and why should I? That's another hook that I have seen so many people in this field, and I'm not going to name names because they know who they are, and the people who go to see them can figure that one out too, that think that they have to stand there with bodyguards. You know, there's a couple of these gentlemen now these days are standing there with bodyguards because they try to imply that what they have to say is so cataclysmic important that their lives are in danger. I got news for you. If somebody wants you dead, you're dead yesterday. There's no amount of bodyguards in the world that can keep that from happening. Heck, when they're on the stage talking, an agent can go in their room, put a little squirt on their toothbrush, and they brush their teeth and fall stone dead. All the bodyguards in the world isn't going to help. This is a marketing gimmick that people are using in order to try to convince people that the conspiracy is so great and they are so in danger. And yet when you listen to them, they've been talking about it for decades and nothing's happened to them. Come on. Old game.
You know, I have to agree with you on that one because I know with this show, there's been a lot of people who have asked me over the last couple of years that I've been doing it. You know, have I been followed? Have I had the knock on the door, men in black showing up, black SUVs or helicopters over my house or whatever it is? And I haven't had a thing. I really haven't had a thing happen. I feel kind of left out, you know.
Well, those times have changed. In the 50s, the men in black were basically government agents that were sent to intimidate those who had seen UFOs or, even worse, had contact. They came to George Adamski's place, and they told him that if he didn't shut up, they would chain him to the back of the car and drag him down the highway till there was nothing left of him. Well, George happened to know who these agents were because his space contacts had briefed him before what was coming, and they also gave him the names of their commandants, and so he picked up the phone and called the director of intelligence for this particular sector and said, listen, if you try to pull this garbage again, I'm going to go to every newspaper and station and reveal all your people's names. And in fact, the FBI, Hoover, was after Adamski's behind because he thought everything was communistic. And so he wanted to pull George into court, and George said, beautiful, I'll come in. I'll name the dates and times of all the crafts I were on and all the other officials that were with us, and he dropped the case immediately. In fact, I have Hoover's FBI file on George. And so that era of intimidation, that's truly existed. And that actually went through the 60s and probably to the mid-70s. And after the mid-70s, this poor field became such a ridiculous mess that there is more internal confusion and misinformation propagated by the UFO personalities than any combined government agency could possibly dream of doing themselves. So they have left it to their own demise.
One of the topics that everybody loves to talk about, Glenn, is time travel. Mm-hmm. We've heard people like Andrew Bashago come out and say that they were chrononauts as children. There's been others who've tried to come out and claim that they are time travelers. There's a fake John Teeter out there saying that he's a time traveler. We've all heard the John Teeter story. What is your take on time travel? Have we perfected it yet?
No, because it doesn't exist, as I mentioned before. You cannot deconstruct the atoms and the molecules of the present to reconstruct something in the past. This is a fallacy. And so, no. And none of these people, you figure that if they're going to time travel either the back or the future, they're going to bring along something with them that they can prove it. And they don't do that either. And they don't take along a camera, and they don't do that either. And so they're long on story and short on proof. And that's because it doesn't exist. It's very simple. There are certain, it's like laws of physics. There are certain things that exist, and that is how it is created, thankfully by a greater intelligence than we are, because if we were left to it on our own account, we'd screw it all up, and we have. But these things govern the creation of planets, the evolution of life, the entire cosmos. My God, I don't know if you looked in the paper a couple of days ago, they released a picture of 1.3 billion galaxies that represents less than 1% of what the possible mapping could be. Now, 1.3 galaxies, that's just not planets. Those are galaxies with systems and planets within them. So we're talking hundreds of trillions of worlds. And do you think that all of that is in motion, in existence, without any type of guiding principle? The only thing that is chaotic is the man's mind, but it certainly isn't nature.
So you don't believe, then, that we're even studying this? What about, you had mentioned the Philadelphia experiment and what happened there. What's the difference?
That has nothing to do with time. That has nothing more than to do with the transportation of molecule, of breaking down a molecule. You take a book, and you take that book and you break it down into its molecules and you reassemble it in the other room. That has nothing to do with time. That has to do with the movement of molecules. Everything is made of molecules and atoms except for your own individual life force. So the table, the chair, your car, you can transport that all over the place if you have the technology. That has nothing to do with time. That has nothing to do more than the beaming of the particles from one spot to the next.
But there are others going around stating that when they were on the USS Eldridge, when that happened, that they actually traveled forward in time.
No, because there were no living sentient beings on board. That original report that comes out, which I have a copy of, there were no living sentient beings on board. And that's why it's so easy for people to make accusations. It's like saying, well, I've been to Area 51. Can you prove it? No. Or I did this and this. Can you prove it? No. Because they're taking a known circumstance where there is no backup information to contradict them. So what an easy way to make a claim. It's like claiming I beamed myself to the moon. Can you prove it? No. Come on, people, at a certain point in time, where is your proof? If you haven't got proof, you haven't got nothing.
But people could say the same thing about you, Glenn, when it comes to the bases on the moon.
Well, I've got volumes of pictures, volumes of people who have also looked at the moon and seen observations of moving vehicles on there. We've got NASA pictures of clouds. I mean, I think I'm one of the few people in this field who actually walks around with a briefcase worth of 50 years of collected tangible evidence. So I'm not out there making accusations that I can't back up. Now, when you asked me my opinion, have we gone to the moon again, I gave you my opinion of whether we have gone again. And you also talked about the fact that the astronauts had themselves, without even me mentioning it, said that when they got there, they found their own people there. So that was out of your mouth. So I will have to say that I don't try to say anything that I can't back up, because I think that's an empty void.
I want to talk about George Adamski for a few minutes, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Because there's a lot of people out there, Glenn, especially the younger generation, who may not understand the entire George Adamski story. Would you help us fill us in?
Sure. Well, I will say that about only 25% of George's story is public knowledge or public domain. But to make it abbreviated, already in the 1930s, George had a school based on philosophical thought. He had traveled in the Far East when he was much younger, and he had come across teachings and texts having to do with the universality of life on this world and beyond. And so in the late 30s, he acquired a telescope and started taking pictures, in which he submitted them to the government. And we were then going in 41 into World War II, so everybody was much more preoccupied with that. But after World War II, he moved up to Mount Palomar with his 6-inch telescope, and then a larger one thereafter, 25-inch, and was able to take a number of photographs of these saucer-shaped crafts, and quite clear photographs, also motion picture film as well. These photographs have been analyzed and found to be exactly what he said them to be, craft about 33 feet in diameter and with a crew of about 2 to 3, and bell-shaped, also cigar-shaped craft. He had an encounter with one of these space visitors in the Desert Center in 1952 in November, in which there were 6 other witnesses. Photographs were taken. Recently, these photographs have gone through a photographic analysis and enhancement process by Renee Olson. He just released his book yesterday. You can find that under Renee Olson as well, of which I submitted those original negatives and photos for him to use. And George interacted with a human being from people in this solar system, and he was given material and engravings that lead to the propulsion system. And a fellow by the name of Professor Marcel Homé found additional engravings, very much the same, about 80% the same, in the Brazilian jungle about 10 years later, dated back about 30,000 years old. So a lot of information was given to George. He was taken on board. He flew around the moon, as we mentioned earlier. He described the firefly effect, the conditions on the moon that the astronauts later divulged as well, and the scientific data that has come since then, which we have put in the book Alien Bases on the Moon, too. And so George's contacts, he went on several world tours. He met with Queen Juliana. He delivered a sealed message from his space contacts to Pope John the 23rd 2 weeks before the Pope died, in which he was awarded the Golden Medal of Honor, which we have in our archives from the Vatican Church. And so, as I mentioned, George briefed Eisenhower and Kennedy, and then he passed away in 1965. My parents worked with him, and I was involved with some of him, being with George and some of his contacts, both during his life and later on afterwards through the times that my parents worked in this field. And so George was a very dynamic person. He created a lot of envy in this field and a lot of ridicule because he had clear pictures. He had material like the piece of the flange of the saucer. He had motion picture films, all these things which backed up what he was talking about. And he gave his time and his materials freely and openly, both the government and anybody who asked him for it. He was not in this field to self-promote himself, didn't make a dime off of it, in fact. And so there has been a great deal that people don't know about George, a lot of ridicule that is left over from some of the people who are working fiercely against any thought or concept of life in this solar system, which is basically the emphasis of everything we need to talk about, because that's the one that has the greatest contact and the greatest effect upon the progress of how we continue to evolve as a civilization. And so I can only say the man had an immense amount of knowledge, immense amount of humility and humanity, and it was a thankless job, that's for sure, because the amount of ridicule that you get and the amount of opposition that you face from, especially during those times, the agencies that were trying desperately to shut down everything, whether it was the Men in Black or the other military organizations, was very intense. And so we have been privileged to continue his work and these materials and make them available and support this information and the educational program to the best of our abilities. My father had a regular job, I have a regular job, and we go about daily lives just like everybody else, but we dedicate our extracurricular time and activity to this field because it has given us the most, impressed upon us the most. And I cannot imagine not honoring not only those contacts but this field sufficiently by not going forth and trying to give people some reality and some sense of rationale to what is actually going on and the purpose behind it, because everybody's out there making claims and accusations, but nobody's talking about purpose and benefit. And I think that's a travesty.
There were a lot of people who were trying to trip him up. His stories claiming that they found a lot of hoaxing in Adamski's way of speaking. Was any of this really provable, or were these just jealous people trying to trip him up or his reputation up as being the real deal?
Well, they everybody tries to, if you're going to be a critic of somebody or something, you try to nitpick as much as you want. There are times when George was heavily stressed. You go on a lecture tour. I know I've done several of them, and you meet people every day. You talk every evening or every evening. You fly from country to country, and the jet lag and the stress. And so as he got more and more, his accent became heavier and heavier. Yeah, he came from Poland originally as a child. And so sometimes his accent would be not so heavy and other times heavier. And the fact that he was a regular person, he was just a normal person who was not somebody, with alphabet soup behind their name and 15 degrees, who can't think beyond their academic credentials or books anymore. And he talked to scientists and related information to them, and they were astounded. They consulted him once on the satellites, saying they were getting corrupted data, and he said that's because you need to build multi-hull devices. And so they went and built multi-hull devices, and they found out they were getting accurate data thereafter. I mean, he conversed with military officials, with government officials, with everyday people. I was present for some of those lectures, and I can only say that there was nobody like him. And so it's easy to attack George. If George made a statement, and it's true to this day because I see many other ones going along this same path, he said, if I had claimed that my contacts came from a different solar system and not planets in this solar system, I would have gotten 1/10 the amount of hell that I have received because I stuck to the information I was given. Because we do not have the technology to go to those distant places to either confirm it or refute it. But that's not what happened to him. So most of the people in this field have stayed away from the fact that there is life in this solar system because they don't want to stand up against the establishment, who they claim already is not telling them the truth, but somehow they're willing to accept the information that's given to them. And that is the whole crux of the matter with George, is that he had contact with intelligent people from this solar system. That doesn't mean there aren't others from other solar systems, but that was his contact, and he never changed his story. The CIA once offered my father $1 million tax-free offshore account if he would rescind his support for George Adamski. And my father told them politely to kiss his behind.
So with George having contact with a couple different extraterrestrial species, did he ever say where they were from or what they wanted from him specifically?
They weren't species. They were human beings from other planets. They found that the Homo sapiens is a common development throughout the cosmos. And the contacts that he had has to do with the... Remember, it came just as the development coming out of World War II with the V2, von Braun, Hermann Oberth, Goddard, and all these people. In infancy, we were starting to just go into the outer reaches of our atmosphere. The contacts that came during the 50s, remember, they flew with multiple ships over the nation's capital in 52, in July of 52, and we sent Lockheed Shooting Star interceptors to chase after and couldn't catch them. I mean, they came in multitudes all over this world to enlighten us into the next step and the next realization. And that was part of George's work, was to help that transition.
You mentioned that he had advised President Eisenhower. There is also a great debate going on about Eisenhower meeting with extraterrestrials, which came to the formation of the Greada Treaty, or Greada Treaty, no matter how you want to pronounce it. Did Mr. Adamski ever mention this treaty at all as to whether or not it was real?
No, there's no treaty. It's a figment. It's a knowledge that Eisenhower did meet, except for the story then has been twisted, and the tangent has, like we mentioned earlier in the program, you take a bona fide experience or informational fact, and then when you know it can no longer be denied, then you just reinsert other information. There's no pact made with any alien species in order to give them access to your DNA or your blood or any of that other nonsense. Hell, in space you can sit in one of those ships and their electronic computers can measure you down to your molecular substructure. From your very atoms of your entire form and body through your mind, they can read your thoughts. They don't have to come down and take anything from you. That's ridiculous nonsense. And what kind of, if you think about it logically, what type of data that you would procure that would be of any value taken from a traumatized subject? Be worthless. This has something to do with what we do. I remember in '67, my father was on a television show in Baltimore, and they were talking about this new phenomenon of cattle mutilations. And my father said categorically it has absolutely nothing to do with extraterrestrials. And I agree to that to this day. And so the editor knew one of the ranchers out in Colorado, so they got him on a live phone. And they said, hey, you know what's going on? He says, I got government people all over the place. I got military people, I got scientists, I got all kinds of people that are experimenting with their machines. This has nothing to do with extraterrestrials. Once again, another manufactured subtangent in order to push a particular marketed thought and exploit misinformation. Nobody needs your cows, and nobody needs your sheep or your dogs, and you don't have to take multiple amounts of them in order to figure out what's going on. We do these kind of experimentations. We have multiple labs, like you know, on Long Island and many other places, some in the Southwest, biological labs where we conduct mutations, transplantations of heads of one animal onto the next, and so on and so forth. We're the ones who do this kind of gruesome work. It has nothing to do with extraterrestrials.
So what about people who are getting taken then?
You have people, well, the abduction phenomena is really multifaceted. And in fact, we have a very large section on our website at AdamskiFoundation.com under the materials section in which we have a large portion that says abductions and their validity. And it's been described from other people in this field as well as clinical psychologists and things like that. And in fact, in the new book, Behind the Flying Saucer Mystery 2, I quote the doctor's analysis that was in the book Silver Screen Saucers, which is an excellent book, along with Hollywood versus the Aliens, in which the psychosomatic thought process of so-called abductees is closely examined, and the many different explanations that has to do with that. I am of the firm mindset that much of it is self-generated.
I would beg to differ on that as an experiencer where I actually woke up on the table while I was being implanted.
And how do you know that, well, once again, hypnotic suggestion can suggest all kinds of things, can't it?
Well,
I mean, that's what part of the process, what they got after the abductee people like Mac and the other ones that were involved, because they found out instead of asking questions like what happened to you on Tuesday, the question was asked, well, what happened to you when you were abducted on Tuesday? So the planting of the subliminal messages or the wording of it can lead to responses that are completely irrelevant to what actually happened. But each person has their own experience they have to relate to, and they have to reconcile it on their own. I think that there is a great deal of information on abductions that gives more detailed possibilities and clarifications to them.
I do believe people are being taken. I do believe there is some sort of inbreeding or whatever going on between humans and maybe a species like the Greys that are happening. I know the experiences I've had. I've been taken, I believe, 4 or 5 times that I can recall, where sometimes it's been pleasant, other times not so pleasant. Now, I do realize, and I try to keep a skeptical mind on this, Glenn, that I do this show. It could be a nightmare.
Well, like I said, there's many possibilities, and so only you can determine for yourself as you go through the processes of determining what's going on to come to some conclusions. People have to come to their own conclusions. I know to a certain extent that in the 70s, starting with the Mississippi case, that we sent out our own experimental crafts, and we also sent out people that we had dressed up in order to scare the dickens out of whoever they encountered, whether they landed in the backwaters of Mississippi or other places like that. This was twofold. First, to experiment, to make sure, to see how the crafts technology worked, and secondly, if they could scare the dickens out of people with some costumes, they were more than happy to do that because that's part of their agenda to begin with on top of it. So there's one there. There's other explanations as well. I'm not going to discount yours. You're going to have to, work on that one from your aspect of it. A lot of people make a lot of claims. I know one clinical psychologist said that people seeing bright white lights has to do with retrogression, having to do coming through the birth, getting born, and things like that. So I've seen a lot of credible evidence that definitely starts to whittle away at the plethora of so-called claims. It's been kind of a convenient crutch for some to fall on when things weren't going well or what have you. So, but we'll leave the jury out on that one for the time being.
Well, a nice use of the word plethora there, which is our audience's drinking word every night. So good job on that. You've done it a couple of times. We're going to go to the thought of the day right now. Thought of the Day happens every night at this time, where during the day we post a question on our Facebook and Twitter. You guys answer it, and we read your responses over the air. Tonight, Glenn is going to join us for this. So, Glenn, we're going to bring in some audience thoughts here on today's Thought of the Day, which is, what is your opinion on the Apollo moon landings, and why haven't we gone back? We got some interesting theories out there, so I'm going to read a few of these to you, and I want to get your reaction as well. On Twitter, Nighttime Network says, it was a hoax. I think the Russians got there first. After all, there's no oxygen on the moon, and the flag is waving. How about the footsteps? Those are off as well. Also, shouldn't we be able to walk that we shouldn't be able to walk that good on the moon. Think about it. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know if I really agree with that.
First of all, they have proven that there is a trace amount of oxygen. The flag is waving because of atmospheric differential pressure, which is on the moon, and that's provable. The footsteps stayed imprinted because of the moisture content of the lunar soil, because they have spraying geysers of water. In fact, the scientific analysis is that underground water is enough to cover the entire surface of the moon to the depth of 50 feet. So I can't say that I find any of those rationales supportive of the actual facts.
Let's get to Lloyd on Twitter. He says, I was a believer in the 70s when it happened, but now I think there is more evidence showing it didn't happen. Otherwise, why would we build a moon base instead of ISS? It's just saying how some pictures are just a little bit weird and strange. A little bit off.
Well,
on that one.
Got to show the pictures and got to find some foundation and say why. To relate to the pictures and say why is it strange and how is it strange and what is your photographic analysis ability. I have looked at thousands of moon pictures under microscopic conditions, and it takes an acquired eye from looking down to see cast shadows, the direction of sunlight, and what have you. So, it takes some practice and takes some skills, but if you're going to make it a claim, then have something to back it up with.
Clarence on Twitter states, we were ahead of our time. We need to go back. Do you think we need to go back to the moon? Is it worth it?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I already think we're there, but if we want to go back publicly, I think absolutely, and I think we can make a good case, as I mentioned to you earlier. If we look at all the technological downstream applications that came from the Apollo missions, the computers, the transistors, everything, microwaves, everything you can think of technologically we use today has come from offshoots of the space program. And as Hugh Downs said, it is a wonderful moneymaker. For every dollar spent, 4 come back in return. So the applications and the benefits of an operational space program is just tremendous. And I think it would shift us away from a military-industrial complex, an industry that Eisenhower warned us so bravely about.
One more from Twitter here before we switch over to Facebook. Jake states, this has been one of the few conspiracies that I've always been in the middle of the road on. However, the more I research it, the more I grow skeptical on the alleged incident. Let's go over to Facebook now. Lucille pretty much has the same theory. She says they did not make it. They may have tried and failed, then faked it with photos and video. Don Pettit, astronaut for NASA, told the public that they lost the technology to get to the moon. Boxes and boxes of info of those historic events gone. But you're saying they really haven't. That's just a bad rumor.
That's just a bad rumor, and once again, high-powered telescopes tracked it to the moon, tracked it to its landing, and even today, if you can get your hands on a high enough powered telescope and you look in the Sea of Tranquility, you can look at the landing site and you can see the equipment that's left behind. So the reality does not match up to the accusations.
There's another negative one from Aldo. It says, they tried and failed. The hoax happened after the failed attempt. It was more important for our government to give the American people something to be proud of since Vietnam was so unpopular at the time. The astronauts were heroes nonetheless. They did what they were asked to do. Neil Armstrong was an American hero. He should have been booked solid for speaking arrangements, appearances, and untold fame and fortune. But many of his neighbors had no idea who he was and what he accomplished, and he rarely spoke.
That's because Mr. Armstrong chose that. In fact, it was said that what he saw was so life-altering, and the dichotomy between what he had been told and what actually existed and what he could say when he came home was so impactful upon his life that he chose to take a very low-key role. And I believe that's quite true because others have said that too. And once again, I'll have to say, for those people who said it was faked or they didn't make it, where's the proof?
Let's go to Jade's comment. She says, I think they got to the moon, but it was different there than what we had been told and shown, hence the moon shots that look staged. Maybe they were not alone when they landed. Maybe it's true that the astronauts were told not to come back to the moon by whomever was there. We certainly have the technology to get there, especially keeping in mind that we have the technology and money to get to Mars and are planning to do so. After all, the government always comes up with the resources to create wars and to fight them, so money is really not an issue. Then there is the secret space program. We are only being told what the government wants us to know. I'd say it's all a tip of the iceberg issue, and that legit whistleblowers are the only ones that can melt that monstrosity down to get it to the truth. Bring it on.
Well, yeah, let's hope that they can find somebody to do that. I know with Apollo 8, we went and circled. We went with 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16, and 17. So if somebody told us we weren't supposed to go there, we sure didn't pay it any heed or attention because we continued to go back. And as I mentioned before, nobody tells you to stay away. That's part of what we needed to do, the going into space, going to the moon, finding commonality of life, using our technology, working together to destroy the divisions that are used against us internally. So if anything, they were helping us. As we mentioned before, every mission was accompanied by spacecraft rather than hindering us.
We'll get to a couple more here. Chris says, real. However, the public is so unaware as to the true nature of the missions and what was seen and photographed. The public has seen almost no color film and or pictures of actual lunar surface that haven't been on A, heavily edited, or B, there's so much nonsense out there it's hard for people to even objectively talk about the missions anymore without doubt or a hoax. Now, Michelle...
That's correct.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's correct. One of the first books came out was by George Leonard, Somebody Else on the Moon, in 1979. We came out with Alien Bases on the Moon in 81, and 2 years later, Moongate came out, the secret military space program by William Bryans as well. We were the first three to actually get into the new lunar anomaly field in this entire subject. So I think that as far as seeing the pictures, you can order them up yourself, and nobody's going to give it to you. Everybody expects something to be flashed on the Internet for them here, and it takes no time or expense or money. I mean, if you want something, you got to pay for it. And with NASA, you can order up pictures and look through them yourself. Nobody's preventing you from doing that.
Mm-hmm. Dale gets the final word tonight. Obviously, we went there. Tens of thousands of people worked on the craft and the tech behind it. Hundreds of thousands of patents were filed on the tech that was invented to get there. The world watched the missions with their private telescopes and radios with directional antennas, and it's kind of difficult to fake signals coming from space and the moon. There are mountains of evidence that we went there and zero evidence that we did not. Basically, someone who believes that we did not probably also believes that the Earth is flat. And that's
well, bravo. I got to agree with him there.
And we're going to leave it there. Mr. Glenn Steckling, thank you for being on Spaced Out Radio tonight. What an absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, and I encourage people to take a look at the book Alien Bases on the Moon, and I hope, Dave, when you get a chance, of all the dozens of photos I sent you, you get a chance to post them so your people can see them on the big screen directly for the NASA pictures themselves.
I definitely will. Adamskifoundation.com is the website as well. Glenn, I'm going to get you to hold on. I'm going to wrap this thing up. We got Mr. Ron Bumblefoot THAL rocking in the background with Little Brother is Watching. Bumblefoot is the official music of Spaced Out Radio, rocking us in and out of every single show. Get your horns up for the guitar god himself. Tomorrow night on the program, we're talking secret space program. One of my favorite researchers, Michael Schratt, is going to be with us. We're going to talk about all these weird, strange craft that are up in the skies every single night. Michael is on the top of it. We're going to get to him the first 2 hours. Don't forget Thursday, my birthday show. I got to do the Packy One Chip Challenge. It's going to burn, baby. It's going to burn. Thank you so much to everybody who is listening at home, in your cars, at work, wherever you may be. Also, great participation from the chat rooms tonight. The Veterans Club on Facebook, the SOR Space Travelers. On Twitter at hashtag Spaced Out Radio. The Spreaker chat room was alive, and we got a couple of newbies in the Periscope room. Glad to have you with us. Appreciate you taking the time. And thank you for participating. We keep getting bigger and better, adding to our audience every single night, all because of you. You continue to share the show, talk about us, spread the word, and we appreciate it because together, my friends, we own the night. I will talk to you in 21 hours from now. Mr. Bumblefoot, we need a favor. We need you to take us home. Have a good one, everybody. Talk to you tomorrow night. Good night.
Why?